loudly on a train and you think, you know, doesn't everybody know you don't do that? When it comes to the introduce pregnant person thing, doesn't somebody in the meeting go, oh, not that one, everyone knows that's rubbish, everyone knows that's ridiculous.
No, they don't, because you get sacked for doing it.
But then somebody goes along with it.
I want you to know, I am surprisingly quiet on the train. I'm very well behaved. I'm really well behaved. Don't play my music, I don't put my feet on the seats. It's really not that complicated,
putting
is
your
it?
feet on, what's all that about? You know,
Don't even. Anyway,
grubby old swines.
Play your music loud, put headphones in.
Yeah,
anyway,
that's the first
big
hour
thanks
today.
to Sam. Yeah, exactly. Big thanks to Sam Armstrong. Ian Collins up next. It's going to be a rip-roaring show. I'm done for today. Back with you tomorrow. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
3 minutes after 1 o'clock. Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you to Julia. Welcome back to the home of common sense. Man alive. It's a lot to get through this afternoon. President Trump described the UK as way out of line, but hinted it could be spared tariffs. Hey, thank you, Donny. While warning he'll soon impose them, though, on the European Union. Well, we got out of that lot, didn't we? Or did we? See Keir Starmer for details. More of that in just a couple of moments. Also this afternoon, Angela Rayner's plan to make flexible work in the default for all looks set to cement Britain's reputation as the work from home capital of Europe. It's nice to have an accolade, isn't it? I'm not sure that's the one we particularly desired, but we'll have some details on that too. And as you've been hearing, Network Rail has told staff to stop using the word passengers in favour of more neutral terms that avoid assumptions about genders, with new guidance also saying pregnant women should be called pregnant people. These people are perverts, OK? They are language perverts. They are off their heads. They are nuts. That's a demonstrable fact. And by the way, since when was the word passenger not gender neutral, for goodness sake? More on that as well. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. Keir Starmer had a bit of a wobble at the weekend. We are told there was a panic at Chequers as he was mooching around the grounds with Scholz, the German Chancellor, soon to be ex-German Chancellor. They were having a bit of a powwow there, but he couldn't get over something that wasn't quite right. He had an itch, you know, the annoying itch. What's wrong? What's wrong? He thought. And then he realised he had an epiphany about 3:15 yesterday afternoon at Chequers. He hadn't been abroad for 3 hours. So he hot-foots it to Europe on a plane. Away he goes, heading to Brussels to join a gathering of European leaders. Keir calms down, his breath and his breathing, his heart rate goes back to normal. Keir is now the man he always wanted to be, happy and completely satisfied and comfortable in his EU skin. There he is with the other leaders, the first time a British Prime Minister has done so for this specific gathering since Brexit. Now, this tells you quite a lot. So he's gone over the channel for chats to talk about defence and security. He'll also meet the NATO Secretary, Mark Rutte, as well. And it's called, Starmer's called it a reset. And you can always tell because he had a grimace yesterday afternoon, and then he gets there and he's very, very happy. Now, of course, the government have promised not to rejoin the EU single market or the customs union or to sign up to freedom of movement. But ministers do want to see better relationships on things like security and defence and crime and... I mean, surely we want kind of better relationships with everybody, don't we? On all of those things. Of course we want a good deal with any similar economy, anyone we do business with, anyone that's a kind of a Western democracy. We would look to find obvious areas where we can work together. They're hoping to sort this out, by the way, by the spring and finalise it in a UK-EU summit. Oh man, I can't wait for the EU-UK summit. Who's going to be there, by the way? Keir Starmer seems to have a PhD and cozying up to all the EU leaders that aren't going to be there in about half an hour. I mean, Macron has never been... I've never seen anybody hang on quite like Macron. I mean, this is the Spider-Man, if you like, of European politics. Every time you think, well, he's got to go, hasn't he? He's been roundly kicked out in every election in the last year or so, and he's still there. Scholz in Germany, soon to be the ex-chancellor by the looks of things. He's going to go, and there will be others on the list. But Starmer is very, very happy in that particular territory. Meanwhile, over the Atlantic, Donald Trump says the US will definitely impose tariffs on the EU. Now, of course, we know about the 25% on Canada and Mexico, but when it starts to get near our shores, you start to wobble a little bit. But we might be okay by Trump's own reckoning. Let's have a listen to what he said about the whole tariff issue and his relationship with the United Kingdom and Mr. Starmer. Have a listen.
Well, we're going to see what happens. It'll happen, but we'll see how things work out. It might happen with them, but it will definitely happen with the European Union. I can tell you that. Prime Minister Starmer has been very nice. We've had a couple of meetings. We've had numerous phone calls. We're getting along very well. And we'll see whether or not we can balance out our budget. With the European Union, it's $350 billion deficit. So obviously something's going to take place there.
Something's going to take place there. He's getting on very well with Starmer, so we should be able to work something out. I'm not sure what it would be. Here's the question. Should we be looking across the English Channel or across the Atlantic when it comes to trade? Where is our future better placed? With America or with the EU? 0344 499 1000. Now, yes, as a bloc, we trade more with the EU. As an individual country, we trade more with the United States. And look, I want us to trade with everybody. I want really good pucker deals with all of those countries. I don't care where they are, whether they're on the other side of the world, whether on the other side of the channel. I want to see everybody. You know, we should be dipping in all of those pies and coming out with some, really impressive stuff. We're an autonomous nation. We're not bound by curious bureaucracy and mad Brussels diktats. All of that is now gone. We can move forward. We can have the best of both worlds. But there is a sense that Mr. Trump might well be maybe a little insistent on things we don't do with the EU, and therefore we get a better ride with America. And I'm not sure that's the greatest position to be in. Nonetheless, should we be looking across the Channel or the Atlantic for our future? 0344 499 1000. Our lines are open. Let's speak with Candice Holdsworth, writer and broadcaster on this very point. Candice, good afternoon to you.
Afternoon.
Nice to have you with us. Listen, I mean, there's a lot to talk about here. And it's a crucial question, isn't it, with Trump pretty much saying there, look, there's definitely going to be an issue with the EU. Those tariffs are coming. The people that get instantly affected by this, of course, are the American people, not the people flogging the goods, unless, of course, people stop buying the goods, then it's a problem. But you can see the wider game he's trying to play here. But he's simultaneously got one foot in the EU and also saying Donald Trump is now my best friend.
Yes. Look, historically, tariffs have never really worked, sort of using it as a coercive means. I mean, it was used during the Great Depression, and I think it's widely regarded now to have actually made it worse. Because, yes, it does raise prices for consumers, it can hurt industries. I mean, free trade has a long history of working very well. You know, it's not just an ideology, it's something that has proven efficacy. And I think Britain's always had been a big champion of it because it goes way back, you know, to the 19th century, you know, when British economists first started speaking about this kind of thing. I think maybe, though, you know, if you were to compare America today compared to America during the Great Depression, obviously America is a much more powerful country now than it was then. So all the retaliatory measures that countries brought against the US back in the 1930s had real effects, but I don't know if they would now. I mean, you're seeing sort of Canada saying we're going to hit back and we're going to hit back hard. China's sort of, you know, trying to see which way things will go, which is very interesting. Maybe it will work for Donald Trump. Maybe, you know, taking this very brash stance will work. I think the downside, though, is that you can break those bonds of trust. It can be corrosive of them, and then it sort of incentivizes your trade partners to diversify away from you or to de-risk from you.
Yeah. And, of course, if Trump says... I mean, it depends what Trump's proposition is going to be, I suppose. You know, there is Keir Starmer over in Brussels working out all manner of new agreements with the EU. And, you know, in principle, we need to deal with the EU. They're round the corner, just over the road, as it were. Of course, we need arrangements, but there is a very real sense that Starmer, you know, what would ideally... We know in his DNA where he'd really like to go with this, but he can't do that. Is Trump going to say, right, there's no sanctions for the UK, but you've got to do this, and you've got to do this, and you can't do that? And that could be a problem for the Prime Minister.
I think so. It's, you know, Britain is in such an interesting position that could be really advantageous. You know, we have these links with America and we have these links with Europe, and we could use them both to our advantage. And since Brexit, we are able to do that. We're able to navigate our way through these sort of complex times. But it's so true when you have an American president that's being a lot more coercive. You know, it's much more difficult for us to be independent in that way. But I think we just have to be. We have to assert ourselves in that way. I think you're 100% right about Keir Starmer. I don't think he's ever believed in Brexit. I don't think he thinks it's delivered anything, even though I think he's demonstrably wrong. But I think to join up with the EU now would be such a tactical error, especially if now they're going to be faced with huge tariffs and we're not. I mean, it's just so in our interest not to join up with the bloc. Although having said that, I know they're talking about things like carbon tariffs. So, you know, we could get slapped with things like that. You know, it's, you know, so many of these things are just, you know, difficult and external to us. But I think I would still definitely say that being independent is worth it.
Well, the year of the tariff, I don't know about the year of the snake, but it's the year of the tariff, I think. That's how it could work out. So maybe we won't get tariffed by the States, but maybe the EU will tariff us. So it becomes this sort of dicey tariff fest all over the place. Could it all cancel each other out, I wonder, in the grander scale? If everybody's got the same tariff, then nothing really changes, maybe.
I know. Well, I think we need to, you know, fly the flag for free trade. that it does work, that tariffs never really work out, that they always end up hurting your economies, that we don't have, talking about, deficits and balance of trade. I thought that, people had moved on from that and realized that we do have specific specialties, and it's okay to have a deficit with a country that's better at doing something than you are. Why do you have to have equal balance of trade? And I think also one of the reasons that Trump hasn't slapped tariffs on Britain is that we do have a roughly equal balance of trade, and it's not really goods, it's services. And those are much harder to tariff.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're going to watch with interest over the coming days what Trump does and also what Starmer comes back from the EU with. A little bit of breaking news just in the last few minutes. The British soldier, you may remember this man who escaped from prison it was about a year ago, I think, or something like that now. Daniel Khalife, he was in prison awaiting trial, spying for Iran before escaping. He's been jailed for 14 years. 14 years. 6 of those are for breaching the Official Secrets Act, 6 for breaching the Terrorism Act, and he got 2 years and 3 months for escaping from prison. He made the whole thing a whole lot worse for himself by trying to do a runner, or successfully doing a run, until he was eventually caught. We'll have more on that story as it develops, but that's the latest. Daniel Khalife jailed for 14 years. Candice Holdsworth is with us. Let's look at this story as well, Candice. Angela Rayner's proposals to make flexible working the default for all aims to solidify Britain as Europe's work-from-home capital. Let's have a listen to the Deputy Prime Minister speaking before she was given that impressive title back in 2021, outlining Labour's plans to expand remote working opportunities.
I talked about the future of work as a Labour policy going forward, that I hope that employers can be more flexible with the way employees work, because we've seen that through the pandemic they can do, and it's actually good for work-life balance as well. So we encourage people to be able to work from home where that's a possibility.
There it is. I mean, it's interesting that, again, just to go back to the comparisons across the pond, where Donald Trump is saying the very reverse of that, Candice, but Angela Rayner seems very relaxed to make it the place to be.
Yeah, I don't think the state has any business in telling employers how they should arrange working arrangements with their employees. That is between the employer and the employee, and they come to an arrangement. And good employers want to keep their employees happy, so they'll be willing to be flexible on certain things. And if that doesn't work for either of them, then they don't work with each other. Plain and simple. This is always what big state people do. They think they can manage everything, and they can't, because the world is far too complex. Most people I know have a hybrid working arrangement with their employer. It works perfectly well. What you don't want is people to start demanding unreasonable things from day one, and then you just get a bad outcome for both worker and employee. It's ridiculous. Labour just this attitude where they're like this giant overgrown HR manager. Awful.
Yeah, indeed. Well, it seems that, and I can only imagine this might be the thinking behind it, that Angela Rayner is sort of working on the basis that if it becomes a selling point, more people will want to work here, will be more attractive for companies to... I don't know, is a company going to move from southern Spain to the UK because Brits are more inclined to want to work from home? It's less common in places like France and Germany, but it's kind of pretty similar across the EU now. I don't imagine that is the reason, so I'm not absolutely sure why the Deputy Prime Minister wants to get so involved.
No, you're absolutely right. It might make it, employees might want it, but companies won't want it. Companies need to be able to set the terms of employment. They need to say, I need you in 5 weeks. The job might just require that. And if that's not right for someone, they need to look for a job elsewhere. The state doesn't need to step in and manage everyone's lives for them. We are adults. We can make decisions ourselves. We can do these negotiations ourselves.
Yeah, we really don't need the assistance of Angela Rayner, of all people, to make this stuff happen. Candice, stay with us. Lots more to come. Candice Holdsworth is with us. Your comments on where's the UK's future? Where does it, I mean, particularly with trade, obviously, but other areas. I've always felt more of I think the phrase used to be an Atlanticist rather than a European. Instead, from being a kid, I think, and I appreciate that, geography dictates otherwise, but in terms of where I've felt a greater commonality, And in fact, in many respects, I quite like that we don't have that sort of strange cultural commonality in the same way. If I go to a foreign country, and you know what it's like around the Western world these days, you know, every high street in the UK looks the same, and now it's sort of bled into other countries. So you find yourself walking around a back street of Paris with kind of similar shops. There's a Pret, there's a Cafe Nero, there's a Boots on the corner, there's an IKEA at the other. I mean, so there's a bit of that everywhere, I get it. But I think it's quite nice that we don't have too much commonality with other places. But I've always sensed that America is our best buddy in that respect. I know it's waned a bit over the years, and there's a bit of a romantic notion attached to that. Should we be looking across the English Channel or across the Atlantic when it comes to our future, particularly with trade? 0344 499 1000. Back with more from Candice in a couple of moments' time, and more from you as well. Lines are open. This is Talk.
About these revelations. Tell us what you've learned about Keir Starmer.
No, it's not for me to say whether this is for better or for worse. But he's not a natural politician.
No.
In fact, he overtly loathes politics. He said so. And we reported that in the aftermath of his suspension of Jeremy Corbyn, which, you know, post facto, he now describes as this great moment of clarity and incision on his behalf.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is from Joanna, who's in Salisbury, who says trade with the US is better than the EU. The EU wants the control of who we are allowed to trade with on their terms. The US is better for business, wanting to trade with the world because there are no restrictions. And that's the biggest problem with everything that Starmer... I mean, if our fishing rights... fishing rights have already gone, by the way, because they were never included in any Brexit deal. So the fisher people, I think is the correct phrase. I don't want to hear people say fisherman. OK, it's 21st century, kids. Just get used to it, all right? Fisher people can no longer rely, in this country, on their government to look after them. But it's going to get worse, because whilst it was a temporary kind of, yeah, well, let the EU have these waters like the same as anybody else can, Starmer looks set to kind of give that away for good. So there's all these weird deals that, yeah, you can be part of this arrangement, but you have to give us this. There's no real free trade with the EU. That is a real sense of the word. Carl up north says we should trade with the US and the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Who cares about the EU? He says in different words. Candice is with us. Let's go to this story as well. I just touched on it there, Candice. Stop using words like passenger and pregnant women. This is Network Rail telling staff. The furious Woke Council also tells staff the words confident, driven and honest in job adverts to avoid them. I have no idea what world we are living in. I mean, how did we get here? I mean, North Devon, let's start with North Devon Council advising people to avoid terms like confident, driven and honest in a job advert, considering them to be gender-coded. So not even gender-specific. This is gender, well, it's anything you want it to be, really, and that's the kind of mad trap of this sort of strange Huxley-like Orwellian existence. So it's gender-coded. If you say confident, you are, what you're really saying is a bloke. If you say driven, what you really mean is a bloke. If you say honest, I mean, is that really meant to be a bloke? I mean, really? I mean, how have we got here? And then Network Rail saying the word passenger is not a good word, and certainly don't use the word pregnant woman. Should be replaced by pregnant people.
Oh, if you called me a pregnant person, I would unleash a hormonal rage on you. I would be so angry.
Yeah. You're not pregnant again, Candice, are you, by the way? Just to clarify, and I know you haven't had a baby for about half an hour, but I thought I'd check.
Maybe I will.
You never know.
It is, just as you think woke is over, like some holdout emerges from somewhere.
Yes.
And I swear it's the overproduction of people with useless degrees trying to put them to use. I mean, all this stuff just comes out of obscure academic departments, stuff like gender-coded. I mean, it's just rubbish. Absolute nonsense. Most normal people do not think like this.
Yeah.
This is like so out of touch. It really, really is. But yeah, it's interesting where the places where it emerges. You know, like just like little councils somewhere and stuff. You know, people have their little political fiefdoms.
I mean, what I don't understand about this, which I should understand, because there's almost one of these kind of tripe stories every week, Candice. You think, fine, I gave the analogy to Julia that, you know, when you're on a train and somebody's speaking loudly on the phone, and the new thing seems to be to do FaceTime on the phone with no speakers, no headphones on. And the thing that always resonates in my head is, how can you not know? How can you not know that that is the wrong thing? Everybody knows. If you ask 100 people in the street, name something annoying, they'll say people speaking loudly on a train, people doing FaceTime on a train. These things are known. And similarly, with this, do these meetings, and one assumes that a group of people sit around an old oak desk in a conference room, either in the council or at Network Rail, doesn't one person around the desk go, sorry, you can't do the pregnant people thing. That was laughed out the room years ago now. Nobody seriously takes. But somebody somewhere not only suggests it, but has it adopted and enshrined in the rule book of the company. I mean, yeah. These are language perverts. They are oddballs. They are dangerous. They are upside-down nut jobs. These people have no place, ultimately, in the human gene pool, but certainly no place working anywhere where you have any connection with members of the public.
I agree. No, I think a sort of groupthink develops, you know. I think in these like little organisations, you know, it's scary to think, but people who sort of have this worldview can actually be real bullies and sort of, you know, tyrannize other people. And you think, how can such petty people get power? but they actually do. I mean, I remember it at university. I mean, you'd have this little awful person who, you know, made it his thing to correct everybody about the language they were using, and people would actually fall in line, which was insane. But I think when the stakes are so low, that's when it happens. You know, I mean, if you were like in some other organization, no, I mean, people would push back. But, you know, if you're in some little council office somewhere, you know, everyone sort of thinks the same way, then no.
And what is, you know, crazy about this, as we said at the beginning, they've now moved from words that are gender specific to what they call they've got 52 masculine coded words and 50 feminine coded words, so which in itself sounds a little bit sexist. And it's, you know, if you put kind and loyal, then you are likely to be speaking more to a female. If you put confident and driven, I assume based on their own twisted logic, you're likely to be speaking to a bloke. I mean, that's a whole raft of sexist tripe right there, isn't it?
Yeah, well, they deal in stereotypes. I mean, the whole gender ideology movement has long dealt in stereotypes. I mean, you know, these men who claim to be women, and yet they have this really cliched idea of what it is, and it's often very surface level stuff. And it's powered by this ideology, which just doesn't think in a nuanced way.
Yeah.
And actually perpetuates sexism itself.
100%. And speaking of bonkers, Scottish National Party ministers are weighing up a ban on pet cats. This is to protect wildlife, proposing containment zones and ownership restrictions. The report blames cats who hunt for fun and harm wildlife. I mean, not as much harm as Peter Cargwell, one of our presenters here, of course, at Talk, who used to do a feature called Cat of the Week. The harm that did to our sanity, believe me, cannot be beaten. Here's a reminder of why that feature was mercifully scrapped.
It's Cardi B's Cat of the Week.
Yeah, I mean, he got away with that for weeks. Nobody somehow noticed. I don't know how that happened, but it did, and now it's gone, thankfully. But cats, look, I'm not a big cat. I'm a dog person. Cats are weirdos. They're oddballs. They don't really like you that much. They pretend to be your mate, but they all have about 6 owners. They're getting fed at multiple homes. They're weirdos and all of that, the whiskery swines. But I don't want to ban them because they once in a while go and catch a mouse.
No, absolutely not. I think you're right, by the way. I think they've actually measured that cats have no change in that chemical oxytocin, love hormone.
Yes, they don't care. They're not part of the gang, are they? The dog is part of the gang.
Yes, dogs love it. They love being petted. So what I would say about this is, no, I wouldn't blanket ban cats. If you have an area where there is genuinely endangered wildlife, like birds and things, and the cats are killing them and they're threatening, then I think it's fine to say, okay, no pet cats. And I think most people would respect that and they would see that it was a reasonable thing. But, you know, my problem with a lot of this environmental green stuff is it's just become ever more zealous over time, this movement. You know, as I've gotten older and older, they just make more and more and more demands, which are just unreasonable. So blanket cat ban, absolutely not.
Yeah, 100%, 100%, because, I mean, I don't know, has the Scottish wildlife been compromised by the existence of cats? Is there a shortage of mice and stuff because of the cat? Thank you, Candice. Glad you are there to shine some common sense on the big stories of the day. Over to you. We are talking we're talking about all this stuff, by the way. Predominant. By the way, do you work in a place where this kind of language thing is a rule? It's in the rule book. You can't say pregnant woman. You have to say pregnant people. There was the train company a few years ago that got it. Well, they didn't get in trouble. They put themselves in trouble. They weren't in any trouble because the conductor had the audacity to use the term ladies and gentlemen on a train. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to do the 1520 to Middlesbrough or whatever it was. And somebody got upset and said, how dare you say ladies and gentlemen? I'm non-binary, completely invented phrase. So therefore I'm offended. And the rail company, in a tweet, instead of saying, mate, we don't give a hoot what you want to call yourself, we're still using ladies and gentlemen. In fact, what they did, they apologised, profusely apologised, and used the phrase, and I can't do it verbatim, but they use the phrase on the lines of, we will never use such language again. Like it was a sort of a litany of profanity or something. Ladies, gentlemen, and bleeps. No, we will never use that language again. Ladies and gentlemen, we're really sorry for this mistake. How does this happen? What is going on? How could this be a thing? But if you work at a place where that really is a thing, I'm all ears at this end. 0344 499 1000 is where you will find us. We'll continue to talk on the trade thing. Should the UK be, when it comes to trade and our future really, should we be looking across the English Channel or across the Atlantic? Our lines are open. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk 25 to 2. So Donald Trump says the UK might face tariffs, as he promises he'll definitely impose them on the EU. The US president has accused both of being out of line on trade. But he did say there's something can be worked out to avoid taxes on British goods, saying he gets on well with Keir Starmer. He's doing well, he said. We've had a couple of phone calls. The Prime Minister, meanwhile, has gone to Brussels. I mean, you couldn't make up the timing of this. He's gone to Brussels joining a gathering of EU leaders. The first time a British PM has done this, this particular event, since Brexit. Let's speak with Professor David Patton, Professor of Industrial Economics, Nottingham University Business School, also former government advisor in various departments. Good afternoon to you, David.
Good afternoon.
I mean, that is a weird bit of timing, right? That as this is all being announced, Keir Starmer is hot-footing it over to Brussels, which appears to be the very thing that Mr. Trump's not that keen on.
Yeah, it is slightly ironic. I mean, my view is that it's not a question of either or. The UK, even though we've left with Brexit, we actually have a very strong trading agreement with the EU. We trade tariff-free, quota-free. There may be things we can tweak at the margin to improve that even more. But Brexit has also allowed us to develop better trading relations with other countries. We've already done that with Australia, with Japan, with some multi-country agreements. And the opportunities there is to do better with the US. And it's very interesting, this dynamic that Trump has made clear he's very worried with the EU. One of the reasons is they have a very big trade surplus on goods with the US, whereas actually the UK doesn't. At least in terms of goods, which is what Trump is focused on, we're reasonably balanced with the US. Yeah. So I think there certainly is scope to do a good deal and to at least stay out of this trade war, which will, is going to be damaging for everyone, but we can minimise the damage to us, I think, if we play our cards right.
I mean, could we, in a curious way, nobody wants to be smug if your nearest neighbours are struggling, but could this in some way play to our advantage? I mean, could we end up doing rather well out of this because we would become one of those nations that didn't have these interesting 10, 15, 25% tariffs imposed on it? Is there an advantage to that, or would it just remain neutral?
Yeah, there will be some advantages. So if Trump imposes big tariffs, he's already done that on Canada and Mexico and China. If he does that on the EU, it means that UK goods become relatively less expensive in the US. So there's that sort of potential benefit for us. That's probably going to be dwarfed by, if there is a big trade war, the danger is the EU, well, it's probably already in recession, but goes into worse recession. Maybe Canada, possibly even the US. And of course, the UK will then get hit by those waves. So I think, there'll be a net hit to the UK if there is a big trade war, but you're right, we will probably do better relative to the EU as long as we play our cards right. The idea that we might go back into some sort of customs union with the EU like the Lib Dems are proposing is probably not the best time for those sort of suggestions at the moment.
It's interesting, Mr. Trump said in many speeches he loves the word tariff. I think he cited that America's greatest time as a nation, as a rich nation, was back in the sort of 1900s or something, and he wants a little bit of that to carry on. But you have to be careful what you wish for here, don't you? I mean, tariffs are tricky. I think there's a perception by some that China or the EU will be paying extra money to deliver goods. Of course, they won't. It'll be the receipt of the goods that will be paying extra money, and ultimately the people who buy them. So it's a high-risk strategy, is it not, David? In the sense that American people, American consumers, will be perhaps the first to really notice the difference.
Yeah, the conventional understanding is that tariffs are a tax, essentially, so they make prices higher for your consumers. We import goods because we can get them more cheaply. There may be a case when there's sort of export dumping, countries are exporting at very low prices or for strategic reasons to protect particular industries. So, you can make a strategic case for tariffs, but there is a cost to your consumers. I think it is slightly different in the US, a very big economy. It's got greater ability to sort of, make goods within the country. The UK is much more exposed. We rely on imports and exports to some extent more than other countries. And it's interesting in a way, the EU follows a similar approach to the US. It has free tariffs within the EU, but imposes quite high tariffs for goods coming in. So that's one of the problems Trump has. The EU, and because it's an overhang for us, we also charge 10% tariffs on cars coming from the US. The US charges much less. So, the EU has probably missed a bit of a trick in trying to sort some of these things out earlier before, Trump, who tends to take these things quite personally and see them strategically, decided to do something about it. It's been on the cards, and really, they've had a chance to do something about this. I
mean, I know this is a world that you know well in terms of the economics of industry and business and the like, David. But as an outsider, if everybody's putting it's a bit like debt, isn't it? I saw a couple of satirists talking about debt recently. That country owes that country 25 billion, and they also owe them 25 billion. And someone said, well, why don't you just cancel out the 25? It's that kind of confusion. We scratch our heads and go, how does this all work? If everybody has a tariff going on, doesn't it sort of cancel itself out if the entire planet is lobbing tariffs on everything?
Well, it does, but in a sense, what it does, it reduces trade, and other things equal, trade is benefit and improves our welfare. So we do have a potential here for the UK. We have been able to reduce tariffs from other countries, which we couldn't do in the EU. So, for example, goods which we don't produce, fruit juice or tropical fruit, we've been able to reduce tariffs to zero from other countries. That's a clear benefit. So I think the key for us is not to lose the benefits we've gained from Brexit, and there are many, even though perhaps some might argue we could have played things slightly differently and got even more benefits, but at the same time take advantage of opportunities with the US without sacrificing our important relationships with the EU. And as I said, we do have a very strong trading agreement already with the EU.
Yeah.
You know, let's focus on sort of improving that at the margin, rather than saying, well, we've got to come back and, you know, agree to all EU regulations and sort of, you know, remove ourselves from the benefits we've got from Brexit.
Well, I was thinking of things like fishing rights, which were kind of left hanging, were they not, in terms of that deal? So yes, you know, the EU can still, you know, dip their rods into our waters, etc. There is a sense that Mr. Starmer might kind of give that right away for good.
Yeah, there was a significant change to fishing rights. Some people think we should have gone further, but a lot of the fishing did come back to this country. But one of the interesting things is the ability, because we don't have to follow EU regulations, we can have our own environmental and animal rights regulations, which are often better than the EU. So, you know, within maritime protection areas, we can ban what they call bottom, you know, the really intensive trawling that can damage that environment. And that's really upset some countries in the EU, like France. And the worry is that that might be one of the things the UK will give up. Actually, we'll make our environmental regulations worse, just so that we'll have the same regulations as the EU. And we've got to be very careful, because, you know, the EU export much more to us than we do to them. So we've got to remember that, you know, we have quite a strong set of cards in any set of relationships. The worry is that the EU might see that Starmer's quite ideological on this, and he really doesn't like the idea of being separated from the EU, and hence he will sort of agree to anything they want to suggest that brings us closer. So that's, I think, a fear that we need to be careful that we don't go down that route. Let's stick with the benefits of Brexit. If we can improve things at the margin without losing those benefits, great. But there is a sort of win-win situation for the UK here to be had.
Let's hope so. But there is that sense that Mr. Trump might almost be the backseat driver on this by saying, yeah, there's no tariffs for the UK, Keir, but, you know, don't agree to that. Don't agree to that fishing thing. Otherwise, you know, the tariffs are coming, or something of that order. That is certainly, listening to Mr. Trump speaking, you know, he was speaking off the hoof, as he tends to do at an airport yesterday. Mr. Starmer going off to Brussels, as we said at the beginning, David. I mean, is there that sense he's got to be careful what he promises or what he agrees to? Because Donald might not like it.
Yeah, I think we shouldn't, we're a sovereign country, and that shouldn't be our focus. What will another country think about what 100%, we do? But I think what's in our best interest, and I don't think Trump's bothered about the detail of, say, fishing regulations, but yes, there may be a case that we agree to something, for example, to go along with UK agricultural rules rather than deciding what's best for us, and that may make it harder for us to then to have a very valuable deal with countries like the US. So that's the danger. We shouldn't do things because Trump won't like it. We do things for us. Yeah. But there are opportunities and dangers there.
Indeed. David, great to have you on. Really thorough stuff. Thank you. Appreciate that. Professor David Patton. He's Professor of Industrial Economics, University of Nottingham, also former government advisor across many departments over time. Dan in Kent says, I'd be very surprised if Trump puts tariffs on Europe and China. I think he's making a point to Canada and Mexico to simply stop the illegal migration. That could be true. On the issue of woke language and changing the way we speak, Paul in Fife says, you keep asking how we got here in regards to the insanity of wokeness. The answer is we, the public, are sheep, and we proved how controllable we are during COVID. Wokeness gathered momentum during post-COVID. Nobody can force you to say pregnant person or men to answer a question when admitted to hospital, are you pregnant? We are complicit in the whole thing. There might be something in that. Do you think we laugh about it too much, maybe? We say, oh, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to make this distinction. But, of course, there will be some people who are called into the HR department. There was a guy, I think it was a gynecologist. Not in this country, I think it was in Germany. I was talking to Julia about this during the news, who was told off or suspended because he said, well, I can't really treat trans patients because I'm a gynecologist. So I do the kind of gynae stuff, you know. I'm all about the vagina, really. I mean, I don't think he actually said that in his statement, but that's his thing. So, you know, if he goes to, you know, carry out a procedure as a gynecologist, and, well, he wouldn't need to, would he? I don't know how he could. You wouldn't be a gynecologist in that respect. Be very, very strange if you were. Stuart says, if Network Rail can't call their passengers, what do they call them? And more importantly, as Network Rail is losing money, how is this language claptrap going to increase passengers, or whatever they call them these days, to turn a profit? Don't say passengers, please, Stuart. If you could avoid using language like that. Brad makes a point. He says, if you're going to stop me from saying fisherman, I'll report you to the ombudsperson. And that's a great idea. Thank you. 0344 499 1000. Back with comment from you coming next.
Across the UK. On DAB+. On YouTube. On your mobile. And on your side. This is Talk.
Somebody suspiciously called Peter in London says the cats of the UK will be set against Ian Collins and his sniffy attitude towards them. The 100 cats who were on Cat of the Week, that's the Peter Cardwell feature, will be working in concert alongside Peter and probably Christo too to get Ian Collins sanctioned, perhaps by the International Court of Justice in The Hague. The SNP should concentrate on dealing with violent crime, A&E waiting times and drug deaths and not be idiots about lovely cats, says Peter in London. I don't know which Peter that could be somehow. But he's absolutely right on the last point. I mean, the SNP have got time to dedicate to this. You do wonder sometimes. You know, all local... There's, where I live, around the corner from where I live, there's on one of the really main roads on the A25, there is, like, pandemonium roadworks. I mean, you don't go there at rush hour. It's just insane. And it's been going on for a couple of weeks. I found myself in it yesterday. It wasn't so bad because it was the weekend. And I thought, what are they doing? And then I looked and I thought, oh, they're building a flipping great big cycle lane. It's like half a mile of cycle lane on this bit of road, which is a great thing to do if you've got loads of money. If you haven't got loads, you might think that would be like number 150 on the priority list of the local council. You know, the council tax is about to go up again, God knows by what. Services are reduced, potholes are still apparent, but let's build a cycle lane. I don't know what that costs, 50 grand or something to build this little stretch of hypothecated tarmac. Jackie is in Oldham. Back to tariffs. Jackie, how you doing?
I'm great, thanks, Ian. Peter Cardwell will never forgive you for that.
He's never going to forgive me. I don't know what he was doing messing around with the cats. It was always crazy.
I think undoubtedly we've got to align ourselves with America.
Mm-hmm.
We're already signed up to the CPTPP. That's where the growth is in the East. I don't understand. Well, I do understand. I think Mr. Starmer is trying to ride two saddles with one backside.
Yeah.
Because you know, what worries me about that is I don't think he's got the political acumen to be able to tread through this minefield.
I think you're right.
Trump's unpredictable.
Yeah.
We don't know what the end result will be if he aligns himself more with the EU because of Trump's, beliefs about the EU. And also, why are we aligning ourselves with somebody that's in recession? When we joined the CPTPP, they didn't demand that we give up this or we surrender that or whatever. It was about free trade.
That's true.
With the EU, there's always a forfeit.
Yeah.
And because he's so ideologically captured, Starmer, about the EU, I worry, what is he going to give away? How's that going to be received by Trump? And what will the consequences for us economically be? Because we're in dire straits.
Yeah, what's the deal with... I mean, the EU always have to add on this, like, yeah, we can do this, but you have to now do this. I mean, it's a kind of curious way of dealing with things, particularly when you're a block of countries that are, many of whom are struggling, particularly their biggest players.
Yeah. And the thing is that the whole system is falling apart, not just economically, but socially, politically. There's so many shifts going on in the EU in the moment that we have got to grow as a country because we're in such dire financial straits. And the only places where we're going to get that is with America, because their economy is taking off, and it will continue to do because they're getting rid of the net zero, and they're going to drill. And in the East, where a lot of the countries are not following the net zero, and which is why they're able to grow the way that they do.
This is very true.
It's logical that you go where the growth is.
Well, you'd think so, wouldn't you? You'd think so. Listen, great call. Jackie, thank you very much indeed for that. Peter is in Oxfordshire. Back to that strange, bizarre world of policing our language, Peter. What have you got for us? Good afternoon.
Yeah, Ian, what I was going to say is I think the origin of political correctness came in the Soviet Union. It wasn't designed to make everybody feel happy and kind and considerate to other people. It was a means of regimenting speech, and that's what it actually boils down to. So you can say what you're saying is factually correct, but it's politically incorrect.
Why would somebody be... But I mean, I get that, and I can see, broadly speaking, you know, that regimes like Russia, China, North Korea, etc., you know, had a set of regulations on, sometimes written, sometimes just implicit, but, you know, you couldn't criticise the government, you couldn't criticise the leader, etc., all of that. But this is kind of... Is this about someone's idea of political control, then, do you think, in a similar way?
I do. I think this is the way. When the Marxists lost the economic argument, I think they moved into the social sphere.
I think you're right.
And so the attack on the West was not through economics, because every socialist economic system has failed, but they managed to make progress through the universities and through the so-called
very good point.
Who brought about Marxism, or rather cultural Marxism, which is what we're now being subjected to. And people are suffering the consequences if they don't comply. So people in their jobs, if they use the wrong word, they're going to be punished.
And those that invent this kind of old guff and endorse it would be more than happy to hear you and I sounding incredulous about it, because that would be job done, right? That would be achieved in the way they want it to.
Exactly. We could just laugh about it, you know, oh, this is just so stupid. But in fact, it's much more sinister.
Yeah, I sense you're right, Peter. Thank you very much indeed for that. The kind of cultural Marxism thing, which is often written off as not really a thing, but it really is a thing, because for some people of a certain political ideology, and I'd not really put it in the same terms before as Peter just brilliantly did, that they lost the economic argument, so the cultural argument, the whole kind of Frankfurt school of how this thing works, is that you try to penetrate your political ideology in other ways. So you do it through the workplace, you get people on board, you make them think that they're a stinking racist or a homophobe or a sexist or some kind of maniac or transphobe or a, you know, even worse than all of that. You know, you're the worst kind of person if you cannot be kind enough just to adopt the language so that everybody is included in it. And given that nearly everybody you meet, almost everybody you meet, realises this is a lot of old flipping nonsense, this is absolutely bonkers, at its highest level, it's bonkers, then, and the idea that you might lose a job because the language police have come around and just randomly dictated that a certain word or a phrase is now not only illegal, but it's offensive to the point that you could lose your job if you don't join in the new lexicon of doom. And that's kind of where we're at. It's the only answer I can think. There is obviously somewhere a mobilised group of people advancing this stuff and loving every bit of it. How they're getting away with it, nobody can quite fathom. We'll continue with your calls and comments on the other side of the news. Should we be looking across the Channel or across the Atlantic when it comes to our future, particularly with trade? All of that and more coming up on the other side of the headlines at 2 o'clock.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
And yes, good afternoon, 0344 499 1000. As we've been discussing, and there's so much going on here this afternoon, US President Donald Trump has described the UK as way out of line, but hinted we could be spared tariffs, while warning he'll soon impose them on the European Union. He's not messing around, this fella, but where is our loyalty here? Is our future best served across the Channel or across the Atlantic? We're taking your calls and comments on that. Also this afternoon, Prime Minister Keir Starmer has been accused of breaking lockdown rules when a voice coach came to Labour's HQ during COVID. I mean, that's the takeaway from that story. You're ahead of me here, aren't you? That is, he had a voice coach. Really? Wow. Did he get his money back? I think that is the question we need to be asking. And lawyers for killer nurse Lucy Letby say new evidence is to be unveiled tomorrow in her final hope of proving she was right all along and is a victim of a miscarriage of justice. This is just the most extraordinary story. We'll have more on that a little later. But there appears to be, according to some voices, some real solid evidence that would go in her favour. We'll watch with interest. 0344 499 1000. Our lines are open. This is Talk. Gary says too much emphasis is put on the volume of trade that countries do with each other, when really it's the quality of the trade and how that adds to the value of economies of those trading partners that's really important. If the Italians sell 5 billion euros worth of Turin-made Fiats to the Germans, and the Germans sell 5 billion euros worth of Wolfsburg-made Volkswagens to the Italians, then the likes of Guy Verhofstadt will be celebrating 10 billion quid's worth of UK trade and holding it up as evidence of how the UK trading bloc benefits the economies of member states. But how would that have been any more beneficial to the economies of Italy and Germany than if there'd been zero trade between them, because the Italians had bought Fiats and Germans had bought the Volkswagen? Yeah, exactly. It's neutral, right? The truth is you need to concentrate on selling goods and services that you are really good at producing to countries that aren't really good at producing them, and only buying stuff that you have difficulty producing yourself that other countries are really good at producing. For example, buying wine from Australia in exchange for selling them financial services. That would be value-added trade. And I think Gary makes a really good point. And I do think perhaps underpinning Donald Trump's position on this, and how many times have we seen, how many campaigns have been, buy British, or in the case of the States, buy American. I think that's also a factor here. If suddenly America say, it's too expensive to import the scissors from China because there's a 25% tariff that we've got to pay. So there's going to be Big Joe's Scissor Emporium somewhere in the depths of Wyoming who are going, happy days, because he can make more scissors and flog them. American-made scissors. Who doesn't like a Yankee pair of snips? Come on. So I think, bearing out Gary's point there, that's true. It's not just about trade. It's what you sell, who you sell it to, and what you're getting back as well in that respect. 0344 499 1000. There is the Australian wine thing is a really good, even France, I think I'm right in saying, Adam might know a bit about this, but I remember watching a 60 Minutes show in Australia. The amount of money France has put into Australia for vineyards, and because they know you've got the climate in absolutely right in certain parts of Australia, so it's huge. I think Aussie wine trumps pretty much all wines, and I don't care who owns it ultimately, but it really does. 0344 499 1000. Robert Taylor is with us, political commentator, a man who used to like a glass of wine, Robert, but I'm going to take a guess you're doing that dry January, February, March thing again.
Yeah, you very well remembered, Ian. I'm doing exactly that.
Yeah, you started off, like, originally it was a month, and then you kind of went into as a friend of mine said, I'm doing the first quarter.
Yeah, that's right. Apparently the benefit kicks in after 3 months, so I'm putting that to the test.
Yeah, and how's it going?
Well, so far so good. Just like last year when you and I were talking about this, not missing it so far. 2 months to go, so watch this space.
Yeah, well, you're nearly a week into February, so you know it's drifting downwards by the day, which is always good. Let's talk about Trump and the interesting. He's talked about the UK as a bit out of line, but we can do business here with them. What do you think he means by that, Robert?
Well, I think he means the bigger fish to fry is definitely in the EU. He's obviously resents the fact that American cars can't get into the EU without paying tariffs, but the other way, BMWs and Volkswagens can get into the US relatively easily, and he wants to put that right. And also, I think he's probably in favour of tariffs anyway as a short-term boost to the American economy. The big worry will, of course, be if this becomes a full-blown trade war, we all are set to suffer, I would imagine.
And in terms of, I mean, Gary, a previous texter, just made the point. I mean, it's all about what you're importing and exporting, isn't it? That's the deal. And I made the analogy there about the fellow with, you know, Big Joe's scissor emporium in Wyoming. I mean, if it worked out like that, then that would be good for America in some respects. But I don't know whether that's specifically what Mr. Trump is thinking.
Well, this is the thing. Is he setting out a negotiating position, as he did with Colombia, for example? You know, he said, I'll whack 25% tariffs on you unless you take back your illegal immigrants, and they immediately folded. So it worked. Is he doing that, or does he actually believe in tariffs for building up the American economy? Now, if it's the latter, in the long term, I don't think that's a very good idea. If it's the former, I completely understand why he's doing it. So let's hope it's a Trump being a bit of a bully, setting out his negotiating position, and the EU, for example, will come to the negotiating table rather than trying to win an unwinnable tariffs war against America. And
interesting, with the EU, and Starmer is over there, he's gone to Brussels for a big old powwow with his EU kind of counterparts. The first time a prime minister has done that since Brexit, so this is significant for this kind of meeting. It's a weakened place, the EU, isn't it? I mean, it appears it had a heyday that is kind of slightly over. You know, the loudest voices, Olaf Scholz of Germany and Macron of France, both of those men. Scholz not likely to be there within, you know, a couple of months, and certainly Macron probably won't be there this time next year. So these are weakened people looking after weakened economies, increasingly so.
Very much weakened economies. I mean, people look at the UK sort of bumping along with almost 0% growth, but you could say that Germans are far worse position. France is about the same as us. So, you know, the EU has stagnated now for 20 years, while the US, for example, they're storming ahead with economic growth. They have done all that time. But since that global recession in 2008-9, the EU and the UK have both stagnated. I would suggest we want to be looking at a free trade deal with America. That should be our priority. Let's get that going. The US is our biggest overseas trading partner.
Sure.
In terms of individual countries, the US is the biggest trading partner. We need to get a free deal with them. That's what we need. Trump is obviously on our side. Maybe it's to do with his family heritage. Maybe it's to do with his love of the royal family, his golf courses in Scotland. Doesn't matter. If he's on our side, let's get that trade deal with the US sorted, and then we'll have a Brexit benefit.
Yeah. It's worth noting, by the way, French President Emmanuel Macron apparently suggests that Keir Starmer's appearance at this summit shows that Brexit has failed.
Yeah, well, he would say that, wouldn't he? Because he's desperate for it to be seen as failed. I would say there's no particular evidence to suggest that at all. Given the state of the French and German economies, they're in no better shape than we are. And I might just add in that 41% of French, only 41% of French people, according to a recent poll, think that the EU is a good thing. That compares to more like 60% plus in Spain. There's a huge Eurosceptic movement in France. Macron is terrified of that. And of course, it's therefore in his massive interest to say Brexit has failed. We mustn't do the same thing.
And it's interesting because I think Spain, because of their, you know, what you call recent-ish history, have perhaps very different reasons to feel more comfortable affiliated with a wider bloc. You know, it's unpleasantness was going on, you know, in our lifetimes, as it were, pretty much. But if you look at France and Germany, I mean, have these leaders not checked out the results of their own elections recently and just how close other parties have come that don't share this kind of fanboy attitude towards an EU? And in Germany, we are likely to see significant change of leadership. In France, it's got very, very close. I mean, these are people not reading the room.
Well, exactly right, Ian. And the AfD, like them or loathe them, and whatever we might think of their overall philosophy, they are fundamentally sceptical about globalization. They want the nation state to be stronger. And the same with Le Pen in France. And by the way, she could well be president of France, succeeding Macron in the next 3 years. So Germany and France, this is why they're railing against Brexit, because they're terrified of what it means for their own countries and the Eurosceptic movement in their own countries.
Talking of Keir Starmer, this is an interesting, didn't see this one coming. Keir Starmer has serious questions to answer over the possibility that he broke lockdown rules after he met a voice coach at the height of COVID restrictions. So this goes back to December 2020. This was during the London's Tier 4 restrictions. Keir Starmer met a voice coach called Leonie Mellinger at Labour's headquarters. She's an actress and a communications coach. She'd been assisting Starmer since 2017. He still hasn't got his money back. To enhance his public speaking skills, Robert. I mean, that to me was my biggest takeaway from this story, that he had a voice coach, for God's sake. But the meeting happened. And it shouldn't have happened based on, surely, the regulations of the day. I mean, you know, you might need to meet a doctor. Not sure you need to meet a voice coach.
Yeah, I mean, Keir Starmer insisted that Boris Johnson resign because there was a piece of cake being served just before a meeting that Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak attended. It seems that this is just as blatant going against of those lockdown rules at the time. Somehow Starmer got away with Beergate. You remember in Durham when he was swilling beer. I don't know quite how he got away with that, but he did somehow or other. This one looks just as bad, and I'm afraid it does show that if you're sanctimonious, as Starmer was, during that whole lockdown debacle about what we can and can't do, if you say, well, look at what Boris Johnson is doing, you have to be whiter than white.
100%.
I think this could be seriously damaging for Keir Starmer. At the moment, apparently, the Labour press office isn't sort of saying anything about this. I think that shows that they're a bit rattled by it.
Yeah, and it sort of shows, and of course you and I have this opinion based on Keir Starmer's words at the time and his condemnation of others. I mean, the idea that Boris Johnson was fined for turning up at his own surprise birthday party, and it wasn't even a party, you know, a few people in a room, can of Coca-Cola and a Colin the Caterpillar cake, and that was it. In a workplace, and even in the same way, I mean, Starmer's, you know, working lunch in, where was it again? I think you just referenced it, where he was...
I believe it was, the Durham one.
Durham, that's it. It was in Durham, wasn't it?
Yeah.
You know, I didn't think he should be fined for that either, and I also didn't think Boris Johnson should be fined for nipping into a room where one of his biggest, most loyal members of staff was leaving, raising a glass and saying, you know, good luck with everything as you go, and then walking off again. These were all ridiculous things, but if you're going to be the person that's going to stand there very, very worthy at the pulpit of, you know, of the ethics of this thing, then you've got to take it when it comes back to you. And I can't see how Starmer, I mean, I would imagine the fullness of time has decided we won't revisit this. But it's, you know, nonetheless, if that's what he did, he's as wrong as Boris Johnson.
Well, there is no way that a voice coach is an essential worker. There is absolutely... I mean, I do quite a lot of training, communications training myself with clients. And I can tell you, there is no way that I could have got away with calling myself an essential worker during lockdown. No way at all.
Yeah.
And so why should it be any different for the leader of the opposition at the time?
And a final one, Nigel Farage and Reform UK are going to launch what they're calling the biggest launch rally in British history. This is March the 28th to kick off its official local election campaign. They're trying to raise £1 million at a fundraiser in Mayfair. Tickets for the dinner price between £10,000 and £25,000. but it's hoping to attract all of those kind of, former Conservative donors, some celebrities as well. And they're putting themselves up there, really. I mean, what they get from this isn't just the possibility of more money from significant people, but they're getting the mood music that this is a party ready for action.
They really are going strong at the moment, aren't they? There was one opinion poll over the weekend that put them in the lead. It's not the first poll that has Reform in the lead, but I think this one was by about 3 points over Labour. The Tories further back behind. There is no question that Farage is serious. He has it in mind. He thinks he can become Prime Minister. Reform thinks they can form the next government, certainly be the largest party. That's their aim.
Yeah.
And all this business about the largest ever gathering, the largest ever rally in history, it's all part of saying you've got to start taking us seriously.
Yeah.
And we are taking them seriously.
Spot on. Robert, thank you as ever. He's Robert Taylor, political commentator. Thank you to him, and journalist, of course, with us on the programme. Loads of comment coming in from you on trade wars, language police. Lee says, about 2 weeks ago, my support worker, Sophie, was asked to ask me if I was currently pregnant by an organisation who shall remain nameless. Lee says, I thought this madness was a myth and was left frustrated that this type of rubbish is going on in 2025. Are you pregnant? Are you pregnant? A pregnant person, by the way, not a pregnant woman. Thank you, Lee, for that. Just Me says, what will Mother's Day become? Person Bearer Day, maybe. Could be true. It might be that. And Marjorie says, cats are the best. No, you're completely wrong on that, Marjorie. They are demonstrably not the best. These crazy, muddled up, messed up, disloyal bits of kit have no right to class themselves in the same category as pet as your humble dog. And everyone likes a dog, apart from a sausage dog. Disgusting. 0344 499 1000. Our lines are open. Big question. Should we be looking across the English Channel or across the Atlantic when it comes to trade and our future? Our lines are open. This is Talk.
Rachel Reeves had this budget for growth, didn't she? This was a great reset, another great reset of Labour. It was then followed by the largest spike in businesses closing since lockdown. 4,500 companies shut down from October to December, marking the biggest quarterly increase in closures since the period of COVID-19 lockdowns. So the third quarter, Q3, of 2024-25 has become the worst month of voluntary liquidations in the UK since the fourth quarter of 2020-2021.
Across the UK. On DAB+. On YouTube. On your mobile. And on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk 03444991000. Ed in Cornwall, I don't know why you're surprised at two-tier breaking lockdown rules. One of the prerequisites of being a politician is hypocrisy. It's a fair point as well. One here from John. I want to know who paid for his speech services. Us, that's who. Well, we shouldn't have paid. The taxpayer wouldn't have paid for his speech services when in opposition or in government. If we did, then that would be an even bigger scandal. Although I suppose you could say ultimately we all tend to pay for everything. Fern in Glasgow says, had a voice coach to enhance his public speaking ability. That really shone through at his number 10 Christmas lights switch on ceremony, didn't it? 5, 4, 3, 2. Oh, look, it's done that funny thing. Yeah, that one. We all remember it well. Back to your calls. Jade is in Shropshire. US or EU? Jade, what are you thinking? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. It's a difficult one.
Yep.
But in terms of food, as to how the British public eat and how we perceive our food, we very much align ourselves with American type of influence.
Yep.
So culture,
junk food,
fast food appeal.
Yeah.
You know, and I've worked in food all my career.
Mm-hmm.
I'm mid-40s now. I've done all the research, Nielsen, Kantar, and when it comes to flavours, when it comes to fat content, when it comes to diet, when it comes to fibre, protein, everything, we follow American trends.
It's interesting that, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, the sad part is, in my work at the moment, I actually import several £1 million worth a year of goods from the EU. So actually making it more difficult isn't what we want. But, you know, we have to think about the greater British public,
yep.
Not about what I want, about what we voted for.
True.
And you know, and quite frankly, you know, over 50% of the country did vote to leave the EU. And we are more aligned with America. So, you know, it's about really doing what the British people want. You know, for me, I don't want paperwork. I don't want all this legislation.
Yeah.
However, you know, I don't speak for 70 million people.
That's very true. That's also very true, isn't it? I mean, it seems to me that America probably, I mean, certainly as an individual country, it is our biggest trading partner. Of course, the EU's argument has always been, well, they're a big bloc, so therefore that's, you know, almost like one country. So therefore it's more advantageous to us to go there. I mean, it doesn't have to be one or the other, I guess, ultimately.
No, I mean, I've worked with Austrians, Germans and the French.
Yeah.
None of them negotiate like the British do. None of them. So, for example, when we negotiate cost prices with our customers, we negotiate, we talk it through. We talk about where the cost pressures are. We talk about how we can negate. We talk about efficiencies. We talk about recipes and so forth. In other countries, the EU countries, it tends to be you can have this recipe or this recipe and it's this price. It tends to be a phone call that's put on loudspeaker and it's take it or leave it. And if you're not prepared to take it, we will hang up. And it literally is like that. We're very much a negotiating type of nation. We like to come to an agreement that suits all parties. Mm. However, as I say, I can only talk about working with EU companies, but I've certainly found that there's no negotiation there. And trying to get them to understand and trying to get them to realise that the implications of making these decisions can be negative. It's very one-track thinking. It's very one-track mind. There's no open negotiation. Like I say, it's literally, no, it's this way, or literally they go...
Yeah, that's so we need to learn that lesson, really, don't we? There's sort of the old quintessentially British politeness is still clearly there.
Yeah, I mean, they laugh at us for queuing.
Yeah.
They laugh at us for, you know, excuse me, you know, it's more confrontational working. Mm-hmm. For example, I remember when I worked with the Germans, if I wanted something, I would always say, could you please? And they would try and work with you on that. When I worked with the Austrians, if I said, could you please, the answer was no. And so when I went back once and I said, look, every single time I ask you a question, the answer's no, why? And they said, because you've asked, you haven't told.
Wow.
Said,
do they see that as a weakness or a weirdness or both? I don't know.
I genuinely couldn't figure it out. I said, I'm trying to be polite. And they said, no, if you want something, you have to say, you must do this.
Yeah.
You must do this.
So a firm instruction.
Yeah. But if you would like something, then it's in our power to say no, because it's just something you would like, not something that you have to have.
Got it. Interesting. So we've got to get our trading negotiation skills up to scratch. Jade, thank you. That's a really interesting call. Jade in Shropshire, thank you to her. Back to cats and dogs. Philip says, yes, cats attack, maul and kill birds and rodents, but dogs attack, maul and kill all types of wildlife. Like livestock, cats don't do that. Even people, cats don't do that. Well, I mean, I would counter that a bit, because most dogs don't do that either. But all cats will eat mice, right? They'll always catch a mouse or a rat, or sometimes a little rabbit as well. You hear those kind of stories. Liam says, Starmer has thrown a lot of stones for someone who lives in a glass house. Seems his own criticisms are coming back to bite him. That's very true. Philip is in Maidenhead. What do you got for us, Philip? Good afternoon.
Well, I'm very, very shocked of this naive government of ours turning their back on America after they've upset him so badly.
Yeah.
I thought that they would have bent over backwards to try and get back into that, you know.
Well, you might think so.
The EU have gone from, in 10 years, they've gone from 11 trillion to 13 trillion. And the USA have gone from 13 trillion to 28. So it's quite clear to see over 10 years, you know, you should be siding with. But I just don't see why he's going to risk trying to get a foot in each camp, because I don't think Donald Trump's going to forgive him.
Well, I think that's the problem, isn't it? But it depends what the camp looks like, doesn't it? I mean, the idea, of course, we're going to trade with other EU countries, but I sense what Trump doesn't want to see is the United Kingdom almost backpedaling and becoming a proxy EU member, as it were.
Yeah, 100%. I don't think a lot of people are very happy with that as well. But, he's given everything away to Europe within 2 weeks, hasn't he? The fishing rights were only on 18% anyway. And when they met over at Chequers, I mean, we're down to 9%, So every 100 fish caught, we take 9.
Yeah.
So that was just a sweetener to get back in there. And I just think that Donald's holding off because of the deals on this Chagos Islands. And
I think that to me is, I sense that's probably going to be central. I think that's going to be central to
this. I'm absolutely sure, Ian, that you're on the case there, because as soon as that deal's come through, I think with Donald's personality, he's not going to let somebody off calling him the names that David Lammy has, and I look forward to seeing it discussed on the show.
Indeed.
Great show, as always.
Absolutely. Listen, Philip, great call as well. Thank you very much indeed for that. That's Philip in Maidenhead. Lots of comment coming through on... We've got so many things. We've obviously got Starmer's voice coaching. We've got cats and dogs. The big question, of course, where our trade is best served, whether it's the EU. We've also got the policing of our language. Jane says, I loathe people saying person of colour. So are we white people, people of no colour? Makes me want to spit feathers. My black friends find it a joke too. It's an interesting one, person of colour, because I know... When we've talked about it before, we'll get a white caller or a black caller who will say it's a meaningless, some slightly offensive, person of colour, sort of suggests there's a randomness to that, right? It could be kind of any colour. And yet there are some, I've noticed, some black commentators will use the phrase person of colour. So I'm slightly confused on what is the preferred way to describe that, but I tend to agree with Jane that it does on the face of it. You're a person of... A person of colour lumps in a whole group of people, doesn't it? Because if you're not white, there's lots of other colours you can be. You can be black, you can be brown, you can be mixed race, and there's a whole spectrum of different colours you might be. So person of colour just defines a non-white person rather than anything specific elsewhere, I suppose. Smudge in Swindon. The latest replacement for Network Rail regarding passengers is self-loading freight. Yes. Graham says, looks like we'll end up communicating like Sooty and Sweep to appease all the nut job wokies. That's good. Please don't say Sooty and Sweep, by the way. It's offensive to chimney sweeps who find that to be an old stereotype. And one in from Chris, who says, my pet dog is not allowed to roam freely and kill local wildlife, to defecate in my neighbour's vegetable patch, so why should it be different for cats? Because cats are nuts. They're nuts. They're weird little things. I know they look cute as kittens, but that's kind of where it stops, isn't it, really? I've never had... when me and a mate shared a place years ago, we inadvertently owned a cat. It just arrived, this thing, and we took it in and gave it some food. And it took about 8 months to realise 5 people in the road also thought they owned the cat. And we called it Charlie, and they called it Minx, and somebody else called it Bob or whatever. This son of a gun was having a right time of it, getting fed wherever it wanted, all over. Oh, Charlie, we haven't seen you. Old Minx is out again. It's getting fed all over the flipping place. And it was a cat, really, with no owners. And that's your cat, right? I mean, if I was a cat, that's probably what I'd do. 0344 499 1000. More coming up from you in a couple of moments. Also, Lucy Letby, the trial of Lucy Letby, which was huge and high profile and about as disturbing as a criminal case could get. And now there are questions. And you tend to resist that mostly, because there's always going to be somebody who go, I think someone's innocent. I think, you know, this person is innocent. There now appears to be new momentum. These are not my words. These are the words of those who are agitating for some clarity and some a complete retrial. We'll look at that in a few moments' time. 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
25 to 3 on Talk. Now, lawyers for killer nurse Lucy Letby claim that new evidence could prove she's actually a victim of a miscarriage of justice. An independent review of the infant's deaths will be presented by retired neonatal... How do you pronounce it? I've never even heard that word before. A neonatal expert, Dr. Shu Li, tomorrow. 35-year-old Letby is currently serving a whole life term for killing 7 babies and the attempted murder of 7 others. Let's speak with Edward Abel-Smith, co-host of Was There Ever a Crime? The Trials of Lucy Letby. Edward, good afternoon to you. Thank you for being with us. Just give us a little background here. How did you first get involved and suspicious, if that's the right word, as to what had happened here with Letby?
Hi, afternoon, Ian. Thanks for having me on. Oops, sorry, I've just done my thing by accident. So I got involved with this because I've been working on or writing about several different miscarriages of justice or claims of miscarriages of justice. And so many people kind of in that space, in that world, were saying to me, have you looked at Lucy Letby? And as you said in your introduction just before the break, it was something that I really didn't want to get involved with at all because it's such a harrowing, horrific story that's just unimaginable for the parents and those going through it. So I didn't want to get involved with it. But I think as I started to read a few bits about it, and the same with my colleague who I do the podcast with, John Sweeney, it's clear there is no actual evidence that, no real evidence used to convict Lucy Letby. So regardless of whether people think she's innocent or guilty, the most prolific child serial killer of our time has been convicted based on no real evidence.
So circumstantial, things she wrote in a book, where she might have been on duty, but no hardened, tangible way of literally and specifically linking her to those crimes.
Exactly. No one saw her conducting any of the murders or attempted murders, and all of the circumstantial evidence, and it's important to say for balance that circumstantial evidence gets used in murder trials or in all trials, is often used and shouldn't be ruled out. However, in the case of Lucy Letby, a big part of the circumstantial evidence was her presence, and people would have heard in the kind of early stages of her trial in the reporting that she was present at every suspicious event, and that's been proved to be factually incorrect. So even a lot of the circumstantial evidence now is under serious question.
And that seems to be central, as I understand it, to this review being unveiled, talked about tomorrow. I think neonatologist is the word I was looking for. I've never heard that phrase before. Neonatologist, never heard that. Neonatologist Dr. Shu Lee. Central to what I think is going to be presented is this business of her not even being there when some of these deaths or near deaths occurred. Is that correct?
Yeah, kind of. So obviously the piece has been revealed tomorrow morning. We'll obviously know more after that. But Letby serving 15 whole life orders for 7 murders and 8 attempted murders. And it's now been called into question how many of those she was actually present at. Dr. Shu Lee wrote a paper a long time ago about what's called air embolisms, effectively if air gets injected into the bloodstream. And that his paper was relied on heavily by the prosecution to convict Lucy Letby. But he has since claimed that his research has been misinterpreted. So I believe that a lot of what tomorrow we'll be looking at will be his research and whether it could actually be relied on in the way that the prosecution relied on it. I should just say, it's not that his research wasn't accurate or wasn't correct. It's more that the way it had been used and interpreted, he believes is wrong.
Many people, understandably, will be listening to this conversation and other similar ones. You'll be familiar, your podcast, Peter Hitchens as well, the journalist, has spoken, been very vocal about this too, and there are others, but the counter always seems to be, well, hang on a second, look, this was a very lengthy court case, a huge police investigation. Goodness knows how many clinicians and experts came into the room to talk about this. Of course you can have a miscarriage of justice in any court setting. Our legal history shows us that, but to have 15 or 20 of them, really? I mean, sometimes there might not be a tangible DNA example of evidence, but when you put lots of things together, then a court is able to examine it from that perspective. And on balance, a jury decided there was enough evidence to convict her. So whilst these stories are very seductive and certainly make us think, there is still, do you, and I'm sure you're aware of this, Edward, but do you kind of sympathise with the other view that, you know, this was not, you know, a North Korean kangaroo court. This happened with you know, some very high-profile, well-qualified people in attendance giving witness statements, and lots of other areas that were looked about the court would claim in a very thorough way.
Yeah, I think it's a very fair point to raise. I think the main piece that sort of stuck with me when I was looking at that question was there were, as you say, many expert witnesses used to convict Lucy Letby. Her defence called no expert witnesses. Now, one of the reasons maybe they didn't call any expert witnesses is because none of them wanted to come forward or were able to come forward to defend her. But we now know, as we'll see tomorrow, and as we've seen subsequent to her conviction, there are almost hundreds of experts coming forward, neonatologists, statisticians, paediatricians, all coming forward questioning this conviction. I don't know why, and I don't think anyone really knows apart from the defence team themselves and maybe Letby herself, why they didn't call any experts. But if a doctor tells me that my sore thumb is a broken thumb, and then I go and see 10 other doctors and they all tell me the same thing, I'm probably going to believe them. So I don't know why that happened, but I can understand why a jury, just receiving expert prosecution evidence, would then go on to convict.
That is extraordinary that didn't happen. What one can only perhaps assume, I mean, did the defence think that their case was so clear-cut because there was no obvious evidence to specifically link her to these crimes that you wouldn't need it, and, you know, let the prosecution do their thing? Our position will be, we'll prove it, and you won't be able to prove it, but the might of the expert witnesses for the prosecution perhaps did the job. Would that be the thinking, maybe? I don't know. It's hard to second guess what they were thinking.
I don't know. I mean, I think that probably was the case. I mean, there could have been something that happened in courts, in conversations with the judge and the prosecution team that meant that experts they wanted to call weren't called. The only witness who testified on Lucy Letby's behalf for her defence was the plumber in the hospital, and he was very good, but clearly is not a medical expert.
Yeah. Are you? Look, you're a journalist. The word hopeful isn't the right word. Are you? Do you sense that tomorrow could be a turning point? I mean, it's all very well talking about an independent review, but it's all, and the press turning up to have a listen, and shows like this having a debate about it. But of course, it's higher tiers within life that need to be listening to this.
I think I don't know, to be honest, and partly because being involved in several of these types of cases, it's the system takes a really long time. And we've seen with the likes of Andy Malkinson, obviously a very famous, infamous miscarriage of justice. It took a very long time for him to get through the Criminal Cases Review Commission, the CCRC, and that's the route that Lucy Letby will need to go through. So I think it will add some more weight maybe to the argument, but I'm not sure how much impact it will have, certainly not immediately.
Well, listen, Edward, thank you. We will, of course, cover this tomorrow on the programme, but thank you for your time. Edward Abel-Smith, who is the co-host of the podcast Was There Ever a Crime? The Trials of Lucy Letby. He hosts along with John Sweeney, who's been on the show before. Your thoughts on that? I mean, it is curious. When this first happened, my neighbour, I often cite my neighbour, said to me, and he's got a legal background. He doesn't study law now, but that was his thing. But I don't even think from that perspective. He said, this woman's been convicted with literally no specific evidence to link her to it. Now, I know there's different ways that criminal trials can happen, because you can come at it from another angle and look at laws of possibility and probability, and of course the jury just has to decide on balance, is it more likely this person did this and there wasn't one case, there were many cases, and that would have clearly also been a flag, I would imagine. I mean, if they discover that she literally was not on duty or anywhere near the hospital, I wouldn't have thought that would be hard to even establish that, would it? But I mean, if that were the case, then I would have thought that would be quite easy to say, look, there's at least 4 cases we can prove she wasn't there. That would be, bang, a retrial right there on that point, wouldn't it? I don't know. I come back to perhaps, and some would say it's a misplaced naivety, but just that sense you have in justice that, you know, yes, things can go wrong. Can they go that wrong on something as epic and as disturbing and as thorough and as, you know, lengthy as this investigation and court case turned out to be? All of it was wrong? Wow. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Rachel Reeves had this budget for growth, didn't she? This was a great reset, another great reset of Labour. It was then followed by the largest spike in businesses closing since lockdown. 4,500 companies shut down from October to December, marking the biggest quarterly increase in closures since the period of COVID-19 lockdowns. So the third quarter, Q3, of 2024-25 has become the worst month of voluntary liquidations in the UK since the fourth quarter of 2020-2021.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It's crazy. You know, I always say, and I know, if you have to talk about potholes, kind of give up radio. When we find ourselves increasingly talking about potholes, if you have to talk about what is best, cats or dogs, give up radio. But that's where we're at. It's not my doing, by the way. This is all about the SNP, who are considering banning cats. Andy says, I live in a country lane of 30 houses, there must be 20 cats. The carnage of dead birds in the morning is horrific. All they need to do is make a law that if your cat is outside, it has to wear a bell. Problem solved. I would go further than a bell. Make it wear a high vis, because that thing ain't going to catch anything if it's wearing the all-new high-vis pussy parka. Believe me, that thing would scare off any mouse or bird. You'd have that thing starving by the end of the day. But yes, it does sound like a good idea, because was that the point of the bell on the cat, so that the bird was aware that there was a cat there and then it ran away, I think. Let's go to your calls. Brendan is in Cornwall. Brendan, how are you doing?
I'm fine, Ian. How are you?
Very good, thanks. What are your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are with Mr. Starmer. I'll say Mr. Starmer. I don't really consider him as our PM. He doesn't do a great job for us.
Fair dues.
He's over there making friends with our European cousins again.
Yes.
And I think, to be honest, and you won't hear this from me very often, he's being a bit clever and a bit cute. He's going to use, I think, Mr. Trump to say that we need to get back into bed in the European Union once Mr. Trump turns around and puts tariffs on all our trade with the US. That's just a personal thing, and I think that's probably the way.
Do you think Trump is going to put tariffs on our trade?
I think he'll definitely threaten it. What
do you think he's going to threaten it with? I mean, I will put tariffs on you if you what? Go further with the EU? Simple as that?
I think so, because the EU aren't bedfellows, are they, with America?
That's very true.
I think that's where it's going. Dave Patton basically covered everything I was going to say, but it was just this one issue where Mr. Starmer has been a bit cute, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Whether or not it's been from his informers, I can't see it coming from his own brain to do this, and hopefully help Mr. Trump fight his corner, saying we need to get back into the EU. Yep. Even though we know it's it's falling on its backside, isn't it?
It does feel like that. Listen, it's a great call. Brendan, thank you very much indeed for that. From the EU and the US and trade to cats again. Steve says, cats, no loyalty whatsoever. A mate's cat disappeared for a couple of years. Assumed it was dead. Then one day just came back, big and fat. An old lady up the road had been feeding it, lived up there until she passed. Then the cat just came back. See, that's the kind of loyalty of the cat. I went to the person that gave me more food. Don't go away, Andrew, with you in a second. Voice of Doom. Is it day 2, I think, or day 3? Day 2. Day 2 of the Voice of Doom. So it's a newish voice. This is the political mystery voice bit. Very simple question. Who is this?
Things that were mistakes.
Things that were mistakes. Don't call in, there is no prize, but you can message in if you fancy having a crack at it. 87222, here it is again.
Things that were mistakes.
See, the more I hear that, I think that is gettable. I think that's doable, that one. I thought it was a bit cryptic to start with, but then I said that about the one that went on for 2 weeks. You can message in 87222 on the other side of the news at 3. If we get a right answer, we will reveal all. If not, it rolls over to tomorrow. Here's the voice again.
Things that were mistakes.
87222. Andrew in Hertfordshire. What have you got for us, Andrew? Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, top man. So Starmer.
Yes.
He's being played brilliantly by Trump. Remember, Trump's spoken to him, but he's not actually said anything out loud.
Yeah.
In relation to the tariffs, if you've ever negotiated with an American, they take the high position. So he's taken a strong position. This is what we're going to do to you. Mm-hmm. So you look at world trade talks, they take forever. This forces it onto the table. He's got 4 years. He wants this done and dusted in the first quarter.
Yeah.
He wants this all sorted. Now, if you look at the Chagos Islands, which we're giving away, and we're putting American defence under stress, he'll just turn to us and say, if you sign a 100-year deal with them, we'll put 100 years' worth of tariffs on you at 20%. And in that case, that's cutting through like a businessman. We're not doing any civil servants or anything like that. You and I are just negotiating this, and we're going to do it. And that's the end of it. And equally, he'll say to Europe, right, I want 5% on spending. I don't fund NATO. I'm part of it. I want 5% from all of you. Or I'll
I'll hit you with tariffs to pay the extra. And that is a very strong tactic. And remember, everybody else is carrying American debt. So if you drive the dollar down, then actually what you paid for the debt, you make yourself more impoverished.
True.
So it's a cool approach. And Starmer, obviously, he wants to do anything with the EU because it takes your mind and everybody else's mind off the 26th of March, which is doomsday. That's when the OBR comes in and shows we're in recession. And if you look at Trump, would he really stand in a room when someone said, you're a failure, you failed, Britain failed? And what a Frenchman's telling the head of the British establishment, you're a failure. A tiny little weasel like that who's failed miserably?
Yeah, a man who's got his own failures and will be out of a job relatively soon, but seems confident enough to say, you've come here, mate, have you? That's because you are a failure. I mean, weird, eh?
Well, no, not weird. Demeaning.
Well, it's certainly demeaning, but it takes some gall, bearing in mind the catalogue of failures in his own backyard.
Well, where would you rather be? Sitting in number 10, listening to everybody around the table saying it's all doom and gloom, we've absolutely screwed this up beyond belief?
Yeah.
Or would you rather be knocking up some air miles to try and beat Lammy? So when you leave office, you've got your BA miles, you can take your family around the world for free.
That's a good point. And get rid of that. I mean, get rid of Lammy. Sound a bit like enthusiastic. You know, when Trump talked about a new dawn, a new era, this kind of rebirth of America. You know, you want the Prime Minister on this side of the pond go, brilliant, right, we've got a brand new president, this is exciting times, we're going to do great business. But, of course, it's not only something Starmer wouldn't believe, Andrew. He's not got the despite having a voice coach for about 8 years, he's not got the linguistic capabilities and the delivery capabilities of making that sort of pow kind of speech. Andrew, thank you in Hertfordshire. 0344 499 1000. We're asking the question, should we be looking across the English Channel or across the Atlantic when it comes to trade and our future? Thoughts on that? And the voice of doom, will we get an answer on the other side of the news? This is The Voice.
Things that were mistakes.
Who is that? Don't phone in, no prize. But you can, of course, message in 87222. We'll let you know after the headlines. You're listening to Talk. It's the home of common sense. Let's get the latest news headlines at 3 o'clock.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
3 minutes after 3 o'clock. Yes, welcome back to the home of common sense. Bob, we've got a lot to get through here. This last hour, ramping things up. We are, of course, discussing Donald Trump, who has described the UK as being way out of line, but he has said we could be spared tariffs. A deal could be done. He said he's spoken to Mr. Starmer. Seems to get on OK, he says. Will he soon impose tariffs on us? He's certainly going to do something with the European Union. He was quite unequivocal about that. Also this afternoon, Angela Rayner's plan to make flexible working the default for all looks set to cement Britain's reputation as the working from home capital of Europe. Do you know, if you want a gauge of just how bonkers some of this lot are in government, they would look at that as a badge of honour. Oh, we're the work. You can always hear it said at a party conference in a speech. And thanks to this government, we are now the work-from-home capital of Europe. And everybody cheers in the room. And I'm thinking, really? You're proud of that? What is wrong with these people? And could self-healing roads be the solution to the UK's pothole plague? New research suggests that asphalt roads could be made far more durable by adding a new ingredient, recycled cooking oil. This is how bad it's got, kids. We're going back like 20, 30 years. Got to fill the holes up. What are you going to use? Bit of old cooking oil from the chips. We'll have the details on that story a little later. 0344 499 1000. Just before we speak to our next guest, before the news, of course, we had the voice of doom, the political mystery voice bit. This is the voice we've been playing you.
Things that were mistakes.
Who is that? Here's some of the guesses. Peter Lilly, Stephen Kinnock, John Redwood, no. Kwasi Kwarteng, it is not. Elon Musk, obviously not. Henry Kissinger, obviously not. Dominic Raab, it is not. Keir Starmer before his voice coaching, it is not. Gordon Brown, no. Michael Heseltine, no. Stanley Johnson, no. And then somebody asked, is it Oliver Letwin? Can we hear that voice again, Amy?
Things that were mistakes.
No, it's not Oliver Letwin. In fact, we didn't get a correct answer. It rolls over to tomorrow, day 3 of the new voice of doom. I can hardly wait. I'm about as excited about that as I am about the idea that we're going to become Europe's work-from-home capital. It's amazing. What have you got going on? You know, we used to export stuff and invent stuff and, you know, telecommunications, media, banking, all manner of things. Coal, do you remember coal before it became unfashionable? We used to do all of that. Now, our biggest accolade will be we are the Europe's work-from-home capital, thanks to Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner's Workers' Rights Plan. Oh, she loves this. She's been waiting since she was about 12 to implement this kind of stuff. LinkedIn data shows that over 40% of job applications in November were for hybrid roles, compared to fewer than 1 in 3 in Germany and France. They're a little bit more balanced over there in Germany and France about this. Let's speak with Andrea Jenkins, former Tory MP, of course, famously defected to Reform UK. Andrea, good afternoon to you.
Hello there. As you can see, I'm on a train at the moment.
Wow, that's never easy, is it, on a train? But I'm glad you're there, looking fabulous, and glad to see the trains are moving, for goodness sake, which isn't always the story in this country, along with many others. So we're going to be the work-from-home capital. I mean, wow, what's not to like? Do you think we'll be wearing T-shirts with this on?
I mean, do you know, when I was a minister for a short while, even my private office, because the thing is, ministers do not have any jurisdiction over the civil servants, you know, the senior civil servants do. I'd turn up and half of my private office wouldn't be there. They'd all be working from home. And then suddenly somebody in the team, they're going to Zoom in, Microsoft Teams in. And it's just ridiculous. There's no control. If they decide that they want to work from home that day, they do. And there's some shocking statistics out there, actually, that There's some councils out there where they have 75% working from home, which is bonkers, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the argument for it, the sort of Angela Rayner argument, believe me, I'm very cautious about ever citing or quoting Angela Rayner, but for the purposes of this, the evidence is, well, you know, it's the 21st century, we can do stuff now. If it gives you a better work-life balance, it's better for your mental health, you're not paying gazillion pounds worth of train fares and all the rest of it. What's not to like?
Yeah, for the individual, but for the country, I mean, our productivity has been nosediving for a long time, hasn't it, as in the country? And I think, if anything, it demonstrates that the trade unions are not only in charge of Britain and the British government and the Labour Party. It feels like that they're holding a big sign up saying that Britain's closed for business, because look at the other things. It's not only the working from home where you don't get to sort of share the experience of older people in the team with younger people, and have a succession plan. It's the issue where, look about the probationary periods, how they're going to be doing away with that. You can get sickness from day one. We are seriously closed for business under Labour, and why would anybody set up a business and invest under Labour? It's crazy.
It does seem rather curious, and, you know, again, I'm not usually one to throw compliments towards the French or the Germans without good reason, but they don't seem to be quite as obsessed with this as we are.
No, I completely agree. And I do shudder to think what's going to happen not only to our economy, but to people's lives over the next 5 years. And I mean, the woke ideology anyway in the within the whole public sector is going to be on steroids under Labour, isn't it? And what people get taught, children get taught in schools. And I just think we are so desperately need a strong government, like reform, really. I think we need to kick that door down of common sense. I mean, you're the channel of common sense, but I think we need it in politics, don't you, Ian?
You're absolutely right. I mean, this is where these kind of conversations can be discussed, and we can get these messages out there, Andrew. I mean, I mentioned at the beginning you've defected to Reform UK. Do you sense, and you just touched on it there, that common sense thing is the bit, much like in Trump's America, you know, he literally used the phrase himself, you know, I just speak common sense. And I think he also said, I speak your language. That's the bit that's kind of been missing from our politics.
Oh, completely. I mean, I've always, all my mini manifestos from being an MP had always say about common sense. But I think the British people want fairness, Ian, as well. I mean, if I can just go on a stat, in Boston, in Lincolnshire, a quarter of social housing goes to people not even born in this country. And yet you see people, I saw as an MP, people waiting 8 years with young families trying to get a house. And as Brits, we're charitable, but we like fairness as well. We want fairness for our own people. And it just feels sometimes that we're back of the queue. Yeah, and that's really got to change.
I noticed as well, we touched on it earlier, that Reform are going to be having the biggest political rally in history, it's being called, in March. This is, of course, to really give the big build-up for the local elections, where Reform are hoping to do rather well. Obviously, as a party, as a new party, they want to raise money as well. But, I mean, this is a party that really does mean business.
Oh, completely. You ought to come along to it, Ian. It's going to be amazing. I mean,
it might cost me 25,000 quid, Andrea. So if can I be your +1?
Oh, I'll have to see about that. Yeah. I mean, I'm making a speech, and it's really to launch our local election campaign and the mayoral campaigns, of which one of them's mine too. And this is going to be an important election, because I think it puts our stake in the ground to show really that, you know, we are ready for government, and especially the mayoral positions like mine. If we get elected, this can be a blueprint of what we can do in government. So it's going to be very important for me.
Indeed. Well, we'll let you take a seat now on that train, Andrea. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Andrea Jenkins, former Tory MP, defected to Reform UK, standing for a mayoral position for the party. It's very brave to do that on a train. You know, when I'm doing this job for a living, people always assume that you have supreme confidence in every other respect. But speaking out loud, like if I ever do something live, some of those things I'm really comfortable with, like conferences and stuff. But, you know, if I was given a best man speech, I'd be melting. And if I was a guest on someone's show and I had to speak on a train, that'd be it. You'd have to drag me to the microphone. But Andrea Jenkins did it, and thank you to her as our last guest. Thoughts on what she said too? 0344 499 1000. Tara makes this point. You were just talking about things going wrong with the Lucy Letby case. Remember the post office scandal? Question everything. And you know what? I mean, that's a great example of how you think, really? It all went wrong? But of course, the post office were running some kind of, you know, in respect of these postmasters, a kind of a mafia cartel of, no, these guys are all wrong, and not telling any of the rest of them that they weren't. They all thought they were the only one whose till was short at the end of the week or the end of the day, whatever it was. Thought it was just them. Nobody told them this is loads of other people as well. In fact, there's hundreds of you, all in the same business. Really? We didn't know that at the time, after some people had gone to jail, died, or taken their own life. And so, yes, it's a good example. I suppose the only kind of distinction with the Letby case is that this went to court. This has gone to court, and a jury have decided, I can't remember, I think it was a unanimous return verdict of guilty on all of those charges, or thereabouts. So it's been through the preamble and got to the stage where all the investigation's been done. It is interesting, as our previous guest on this made the point, that there was no the defence, her defence team didn't call any expert witnesses. There seems to be quite a lot of expert witnesses coming forward now. We're going to have more on that on the programme tomorrow as well, when this clinician is due to launch an inquiry into this area. I don't know whether that will penetrate the legal world. There's a process for that. If you are disgruntled with the result of a court case, you go through a lengthy process to do it. You can't just do it via the media and hope for the best, but it might motivate the powers that be to act if they believe there is substantial evidence to act. 0344 499 1000. Let's go back to tariffs. Pav is in Harrow. How are you doing, Pav?
Good afternoon, Ian.
Afternoon to you. So, are we Team English Channel or Team Atlantic, Pav?
I don't think we necessarily need to be either, Ian, and I'll briefly explain why. I know a lot of people have been offering commentary on Trump. I've been sitting back for the last few days trying to soak it all in and see what I made of it. And I think that the real key was what he said about Panama, when he said that the Panama Canal is being controlled by the Chinese, and basically America needs to get it back under either its own auspices or to wrest that influence away. And I therefore do think that, you know, the tariffs that he's put on, or allegedly will put on Canada and Mexico and even the EU, the one factor that I find in common with all three of those, and I hope I don't sound too conspiratorial with this, is that all of them have, to some degree, some influence of the Chinese within them. If you go to Mexico, the criminal cartels, the drugs, some of the fentanyl stuff that's been coming in, as well as the immigrants and the illegals that have been coming, there's a significant number of the Chinese that have been doing there. For those who doubt that, you only need to look at Beijing accepting that they will take back the illegal immigrants from America. Go north of the border into Canada, and Justin Trudeau, as well as his father, have long-standing ties with China, some suggesting otherwise. And so there's therefore been an issue there in terms of how much control China is exerting there. Come back over to this side of the pond and the European Union, you only need to look at some of the agreements they put in place when about a year and a half ago, and I called you in at the very time, the EU allowed China to reword the statement that they were going to put out because the Chinese felt they didn't reflect well on them. So I think that the key here is Trump basically trying to reassert American influence. It is a sort of continent-wide American nationalism, but that's really been there since the Monroe Doctrine anyway. But he's trying to reassert America's influence over the world. I have no doubt that once he sits down, I think they're scheduled for talks today, he will turn around and reassess that and turn around and try to champion it as some sort of win for America, whereby, you know, the Canadians and the Mexicans either accede to some of his demands or perhaps reshape that. But I think really what we're seeing out in the world is a massive, essential geopolitical stance and you know, posturing, and we need to decide, more importantly from our perspective, which way we go. Yes, it's not a surprise to me, it's not a surprise to anybody who saw the current PM with his very obvious stance during 2016 to 19 about what he's going to do seemingly, but But we've got to give him the benefit of the doubt, see what he comes back with on the EU, etc. But the concern that I have, Ian, is that far too many commentators in this country in particular are simply being far too idealistic. They're looking at the EU zone and still, as for my mind, but being all nostalgic about it. The reality is, as I've said to you many times before, and I'll never tire of saying this, you look at the economic growth, saturated, has been for decades. Investors haven't been advising to invest in that zone for a long time. You look at militarily, aside from us when we were in France, basket case, and has been for a long, long time with the defence spending there. You look at, in terms of socially, all the issues that have occurred in the EU zone in terms of migrants and integration and everything else. What possible reason is there, if we're being objective, and I know it's difficult being objective given the referendum, what possible reason would there be to align with the EU other than to have this childish adolescent nostalgia to say we were once part of them and that we inhabit the same continent? The reality is, in a global world where we're in the digital age, we need to look beyond mere borders. And the sooner our government and people stop whining about this whole post-1945 mentality, the better it will be for us, the better it will be for our position in the world, and the better it will be for everybody who's here, who, at the end of the day, it wasn't about economics, Ian. It was about having our politicians accountable so we could throw them out, and in that vein, roll on 2029.
Yeah, spot on. There it is. Pav, thank you very much indeed. That's absolutely key. The accountability and our ability to throw them out. Roll on, is that how long it's going to be? 2029 to another general election. I'll be laid on a beach in Barbados then, maybe. 0344 499 1000. This from Alan in Notts, who says, state of the roads in the UK, cooking oil additive is a distraction, notwithstanding essential pothole repairs. It's a long-term, properly funded rolling programme that is needed to repair and replace roads in this country with an advanced, robust tarmac specification that is used in Europe, which is far more resilient to high temperatures, degradation and localised failure. That's a really good point. And one here from David, who says, about 15 years ago, I read a blog post about the composition of tarmac being changed for climate change. The big author and experienced highway engineer said there would be potholes everywhere due to this contraction, rain seeping and then freezing. And there it is. Turned out to be true after all. More comment from you on the way. Coming up on 3:20. This is Talk.
every time the Prime Minister goes abroad, which is quite a lot of the time, he gives our money and our powers away and seems to take leave of his senses. I'm very worried going to Brussels, he's going to give away all sorts of concessions simply to get talks.
Yeah.
It's always the EU strategy. Hang tough, make Britain submit, and then say, well, maybe we might find a crumb from the table after you've sent us a full meal.
Yeah.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
One in from Kelvin, who says, "Hi, David. Brackets, I hope I got your name right. Good afternoon. I don't think buying food from the EU is good value for money. You go into a supermarket, the signs say fresh vegetables from local farms last week. Most supermarkets' veg has gone soft by the next day. Total rubbish. And we overpay for it. It sat for weeks abroad in a warehouse, then a freezer. Then I sat around over here for God knows how long before it's on the shelves. All because this lot of bungalow bobs in power prefer to import it at great expense rather than let our own farmers grow it, putting them out of work when they aren't trying to rob them of their lands." Yeah, I do often look for that, because you go in your local supermarket and you do see sometimes that these apples came from literally a place down the road. I think over the years some supermarkets have been conscious of trying to buy local, your potatoes and whatnot, but it's not, but simultaneously I can pick up another packet of potatoes and they come from Spain. Did you need that? One here, Ian, who helped us in 2 world wars? USA, and who were fighting Germany, and Italy, etc. Trade with Trump, says that one. Mike Fuller. I still try to act like a gent. Where women are concerned, I reject all wokeness and only use master, miss, Mrs. and Mr. If it offends anyone, though, the bloody world has gone mad. Do people use master? I think when you're I remember I had an auntie who would send me birthday cards with master on the, and the post. It was even weird then. I was like 7 thinking, what kind of witchcraft is this? Master. That was a really weird way. But yeah, that is a thing. Mr., Mrs., Miss or Ms. Ms. Yes. I can't tell you what Adam just said in my ear. It'd be too unfair. Too unfair. Let's go to your comments. David is in Exeter. How are you doing, David?
I'm okay, Ian. Perfect in there, talking about European security, 2 world wars and the US.
Yeah.
You asked earlier about, where should we be going in policy? Should we be leaning towards the EU or should we be leaning towards the US? And I've got to say, where security and defence is concerned, that we absolutely have to lean towards the US and not towards the EU. Now, unfortunately, that's not how Keir Starmer, Tony Blair, and particularly Jonathan Powell, the new National Security Advisor, you may remember him from being Tony Blair's former 2IC.
He was indeed.
That's not where they're going. Today, it looks highly likely that Starmer and Powell, or whoever the civil service entourage of these with, will conclude going into European Defence Union this evening. And Labour have dressed this up as a pact, a security and defence pact. Well, that's not what European Defence Union is. It's single point command and control of all defence and security services in the EU.
Yes, there is no pact. Pact sounds like almost a voluntary organisation.
Well, it's all cosy and nice. He doesn't want to spook the electorate, or particularly, this is the key bit. that Ursula von der Leyen has already stated in terms she wants one single, this is where everybody needs to pay attention, one single European-appointed defence contractor.
Yeah.
So the common procurement. This is the thing Maggie railed against. She said no to it. And it's all very well Tony Blair saying at the Munich Defence Conference we should maintain the relationship with America through NATO. Well, that's not happened because they've not invested, they've cut, they've hollowed out, they've reduced our military to really a facade, an illusion. And now we're going to see him go towards the EU. And I'm pretty convinced from years of lobbying this in Parliament with the Tory party. I just actually saw a little seed of encouragement from James Cartledge this afternoon talking about that it would mean common procurement with the EU. And this is a really serious thing.
So we would have no choice but to only buy whatever machinery and weaponry and arms we wanted. But based on what you've just said, David, we'd have no choice but to buy it through Ursula von der Leyen's dream-appointed one-stop shop.
Yes, and that will mean pulling away from the US. And this, I'm pretty convinced of this because I've discussed it with Nigel Farage numerous times, that the Trump opinion and the circle of defence and security advisors he's got there are wide awake. What that means for Five Eyes security intelligence sharing, which is the key to it all, and particularly the special nuclear contract, because don't forget, our nuclear warheads are actually American IP.
Yeah.
Now, this is the key bit. So what Ursula said when she was telling everyone about European Defence Union a few years ago was that she wanted any service personnel in the EU zone, regardless of the country, to be able to get in and out of any bit of kit that the EU buys. That could be anything, a helicopter, a plane, or whatever, a ship, any kind of defence equipment, and be able to do it on a common basis. So what does that mean, Ian, for BAE, Babcock and Rolls-Royce? What does that mean to those critical UK defence companies if they have no choice but to lay with the EU and be unified?
What's the danger then for... What does Starmer get back from this? So if let's say he rolled over and went, OK, it's not ideal, but you've got this coming back.
Look, it's a given that he's going to do this. The question is, what does that mean for our own sovereignty in defence and security? Now, I'm in good company with this because Sir Richard Dearlove, former head of MI6, has been constantly calling this out since the Brexit campaign, along with myself and a few other officers, that the EU will have the competence in foreign and defence policy. Now, that will pull even more away from Whitehall and Parliament. They will have even less competence because the policy will be set from there. Now, I'm under no. There's nothing at the moment that suggests to me that Jonathan Powell and Starmer will do this. And this is the bit: is the British public and the taxpayers don't understand because the elected politicians have failed to really tell them about this and articulate to them what is involved in this thing. You see, Starmer dressed it up as a pact. Nobody's spooked by it. There was a bit of a pushback from Sir Richard Dearlove, Gwyneth Prince, and a few officers from the Brexit campaign that were pushing back against this. But there hasn't been the awareness, and this is literally like we're going to this is going to be salami sliced in. They're going to align the policy. It'll be critically be in a policy alignment that this happens. This is going to take place today, so that our policy will be the same as the EU's, and it'll just slide along in parallel. And all of a sudden, without anybody knowing, and I've got enough data points from civil servants in our own Whitehall establishment that are saying they don't need any further scrutiny from Parliament or a treaty to do this. They will literally just do it. So you could see a situation here where where the EU is making so much progress in this key objective for them, and they're using the Ukraine as a catalysing lever.
Of course.
The Trump administration is going to say, well, hang on a minute.
Yeah.
You're not having our cake and eat it. We've guaranteed your security. And, and he warned about all the gas and all the rest of it years ago in his previous term. But he's been saying to everyone, you need to invest in defence more. Now, he's saying 5% yet. That's probably right. That's probably correct under the circumstances. So has Keir Starmer done anything with investing in our national defence? Can you see any actual national investment? No, because the money's going to go into the EU.
Because it's going to go elsewhere. Just tell me, David, what's your own... So you're remarkably well informed on this. You clearly have an in on something here. What's your own story?
My story, I lobbied in Parliament with some UK defence and security companies, and then this is back in the pre-referendum period, and then in my own time, I lobbied against Conservative defence cuts, which was at the time Cameron and Osborne. Then I got involved with some veterans lawfare for a couple of the veterans that were being legally hounded. Then we find that there's 800 of these guys being hounded, and then I've paddled along with this sort of problem of the EU defence union for quite some years, and it's literally like banging your head against a wall, because the Whitehall machinery, if you remember back in Theresa May's period, Theresa May was going to take us formally into European Defence Union via a section in the backstop, and it was me and Anne Widdecombe put a pause to that. And there was enough of a pushback with a few officers to say this is no good because we'll lose defence autonomy and industrial autonomy, and we'll lose the policy that the EU will have it. So all credit to Anne Widdecombe, and Nigel Farage was pushing back against it in G19. So it paused under Boris Johnson and Lord Frost. But as soon as Liz Truss came in, the Whitehall blob advanced the salami slicing of the agreements, and it went further under Rishi, and then as Starmer then basically sort of, he cloaked it in this, we're going to have a pact. That's not what it is. With his policy at the GE. So, we've got a situation here where this is a long-term thing. I think probably the best way of framing this for anybody listening, in the referendum campaign, I had a summons from the great Lord Tebbit, who basically gave me all of the inner workings from the Thatcher proposal that she got from Jacques Delors in 1984, where Jacques Delors asked Maggie for defence union back then, and Maggie said no to it because there was no clear destination. And we now know what the destination is because Ursula's articulated it. She's told everyone she wants single point command and control. And I can assure you, Ian, there's no technical difficulties in doing this because all the command and control systems are all ready to go. They're just to throw a switch and it'll all happen.
Wow.
But what they've not done is they've not actually started mustering fully. There's some mustering at the EU with external action forces and stuff. They tend to use very flowery language with this stuff to cloak it so nobody gets spooked.
Of course.
But then, of course, our biggest issue, and I got this from the late and very great Admiral Lord Boyce, was that the agreement at the referendum was that defence and security would be excluded from the taking back control gambit. So the Leave people never talked about it because we were already part way in. And it was embarrassing for the Conservative government because Cameron had part way salami sliced it in. He cut our national defence and salami sliced us partially into it. And then, we can't open that Pandora's box up because we're all going to look like idiots.
And it's interesting, isn't it, that you say, we were already just the salami slicing already part the way in. That goes across so many areas, right? Not just defence, climate as well. Lots of things we're already in. Fishing that we've been talked about. It's amazing how far we are actually in for a country that left.
Well, it was never part of that arrangement. It's always proceeded separate in separate silo. I think probably the thing to do, Ian, so people understand this a bit better, is Tony Blair admitted that he initiated the European defence concept, he called it. He didn't call it defence union, he called it defence concept. But that's what it is. It's defence union. It's like currency union. At the Munich Defence Conference about 2018, where he said, I quote, "It is absolutely essential in his view that proceeds." Now, we're now seeing that come to pass with Jonathan Powell and Starmer. And next week, we're going to wake up in a very different country.
On that point, listen, David, I have to move for no other reason than time, but that's an incredibly powerful call. And fair play to yourself for the diligence and the work that you put in to get answers to this. Sometimes things really are in plain sight. And there it is. That's David in Exeter. Wow. Our lines are open, 0344 499 1000. Sorry to do this to you, but we are going to return to potholes in just a moment. Keep it here. It is Talk. It's 25 to 4.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, just coming up on 22.4. Jeremy Kyle's here at 4 o'clock. We'll chat to Jezza before then to find out exactly what is going on. But let's look at this pothole story. Yeah, I know it's another pothole story. Could self-healing roads be the solution to the UK's pothole plague? It's quite a measure, isn't it? It's quite a barometer of failure if you can't fix them. I know I've said this before, but when I was about 18, I lived in Spain for a bit, so I worked down there. And Spain was kind of... So it was in the sort of 80s, like late 80s, somewhere like that. Still discovering itself, really. But it was, the roads were knackered. You know, whenever you went anywhere off a motor, it was absolutely cream crackered. If you go back there now, those roads are wonderful. They're really sorted. And our roads are knackered. Scientists say asphalt roads could be made far more durable by adding a new ingredient, recycled cooking oil. Of course it is. Fixing all of the UK potholes would cost an estimated £16.3 billion. There's a lot of places the government could get that money if they wanted to. Let's speak with Rob Lyons, Academy of Ideas Science and Tech Director. Good afternoon to you, Rob.
Hiya.
Now listen, I get it. Sometimes the simplest and, on the face of it, craziest ideas are the right ideas. I don't know anything about the fixing of potholes. I know very little about the chemical components of cooking oil, other than oil. So maybe I'm missing something here, but apparently we can save 16.3 billion quid by buying some bottles of air fry crisp and dry to sort out the problem.
No, we can't save 16.3 billion quid by buying recycled oil. The idea of this is that you can add this stuff as you're laying the road, and there's plant spores in the this mix, and when the road gets squeezed, the oil comes out and it helps to stop the bitumen from cracking and helps kind of keep it all together. So it might have some limited use when you're relaying roads, I think. You would have to be relaying roads completely, and then or building new ones, and then it might make these roads a bit more durable. So think it's great that we're trying to be innovative about these things.
Sure. But it sounds more like a sort of bitumen-based moisturiser than anything else.
Something like that, yeah. Whereas, you know, it's unfortunately fixing potholes is still pretty much a labour-intensive process of getting a bunch of blokes out there with a machine and patting down tarmac afterwards and all that sort of stuff. I'm afraid we just have to get on with it, and there are no simple solutions to it at the moment, given the way that we build our roads, which has been a pretty successful way of building roads. We've been doing it for well over a century, and they're really not bad, but the fact is that we just haven't been spending enough money to maintain them, and these innovations will help at the margins, but they're not the same as just employing the people to fix the roads. And the thing is, I was thinking about this in terms of the incentives. When you knacker your car because there's a pothole, council doesn't care, because the council isn't on the hook for it. If the council were on the hook for fixing your car because of potholes, I suspect that they get done a lot quicker.
Good point.
Council budgets are obviously very, very stretched at the moment, particularly with social care, which is their responsibility. But there have got to be better ways to fund this. And there's a certain point at which these potholes really become a drag on the economy, a drag on people's living standards, and we just have to get on and fix them. And somebody within government just has to push it and make sure that it happens. At the moment, it seems it's always the bridesmaid, never the bride.
Yeah,
of all the infrastructure things that we're doing. It's
a sort of bit of a backseat one, isn't it, for governments, and it's an awful lot of money. It's rather interesting. You know that adage, Rob, that particularly for men, when they're debating over a pint, all roads lead back to the Romans. And of course, this is one such great example where, quite literally, they do. And in terms of what the Romans might be thinking today when they had this road thing in mind. I'm sure there would have been a conversation where one Roman said to another one as they're making Stone Street or something, in 1,000, 2,025 years time, this is going to be amazing. These things will last forever. I sense we're going backwards.
Yes, well, we may well be. I mean, we'd love to build like new infrastructure projects, or like governments love to announce them if the greenies allow them to be built.
True.
But but we're really rubbish at maintaining the infrastructure that we've got. And so it's not just so around where I live in Fife in Scotland, and the number of lines, the road, they seem to have run out of road paint, so they don't redo the stop lines at junctions anymore.
Yeah.
So they're worn out, so you miss them. You end up ploughing across a junction quite accidentally because you didn't see what's left of the line. It's all these little things, but it's the ordinary driver who ends up on the hook for these things, never the councils not doing their jobs or the government not providing enough cash to councils to allow them to do the job. Whichever way it is, we need to spend a bit of money on this stuff, and it is absolutely infuriating when it doesn't happen.
You're not wrong about that. Listen, Rob, thank you. We will speak again, I'm sure. Rob Lyons is from the Academy of Ideas. He's Science and Tech Director over there. I've always thought that it's very... Look, on the list of priorities, somebody says, like, your local authority's got to spend money on social care. Clearly that would trump potholes. But potholes must not be written off as insignificant. They are massively important for a whole number of reasons. But for me, I think roads and good roads are really symbolic of a society that is sorted, a civilized society. Even their roads are neat and tidy. You can get from A to B, social mobility, good transportation, good arterial routes between one place and another, whether they're major roads or back streets. Someone somewhere has not been doing joined up thinking, and the smart money sort of says, well, over the years, you know, what they used to build roads with back in the day, they never use that stuff now, so they fill it up and give it a couple of years and it's back to where it was again. I really believe that roads are quite totemic in the symbolism of where we're at as a society. And I go back to that Spain analogy because I thought it was quite a good one, in the sense that it was an era where Spain were just beginning to kind of discover life, free from, you know, tyranny, if you like. Couple of decades on, there they were with capitalism and democracy in a way that hadn't been seen. And the fact their roads were a bit knackered, well, that's fine, because they've been under this system and soon they won't be. And fast forward 20 years, I went back there, been back a number of times to that specific place, and the roads are great. The roads are fabulous. And now our roads are knackered. So what the hell is going on? Anne is in Sussex. Anne, what have you got for us? Reference Network Rail and the policing of our words. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon to you, Ian. It was just as soon as I heard that item and I thought, yes, more trying to change the way that we think in this country. But I thought any organisation that is paying all these salaries to these diversity staff or whatever, yes, they have got to prove their worth. So they come up with all these crazy ideas to justify the salaries they're receiving. And they are crazy ideas. You know, we are not going to be monitored by the thought police.
Sure.
And everyone should be standing up against it, honestly.
100%. And you know, you might think, in addition to the just sheer lunacy of it, regardless of anything, it's just clearly bonkers. You might think, in a world where, and we were just discussing the lack of urgent action with potholes, councils are short of money, that the very last thing councils, or even private corporations, but certainly public ones, the very last thing they would be spending money on would be having heady meetings to work out which words might be unpalatable for normal people.
Ian, can I comment on that?
Please.
From my history, is that councils employ an enormous number of staff. Our new councils that have changed colour, and I was reading about Bristol earlier, what's happening there.
Yeah.
The first thing they usually do is increase councillors' expenses. And then they increase car parking charges, which will affect businesses from 8 to 8 p.m.
Sure.
They come in. There is a lot of money spent in all the councils, but I understand if they declare themselves bankrupt, Angela Rayner will make sure that they can increase the precepts. And now that we've got town, county and district councils all increasing their precepts, It has got to stop. Money has been spent like water, and the staffing numbers are huge, and of course the pension bills that I'm sure you all know about are enormous.
Yeah, and there seems very little urgency from central government, let alone local government. You want a bit of trickle down. You know, like we've seen in the States, there is a sense of let's employ some common sense here, stop messing around with stupidity and get on with the job, make life great again. But I don't think Keir got the memo on that one. And thank you very much indeed for that. 0344 499 1000. More comments on the way. It's 10 to 4. This is Talk.
Every time the Prime Minister goes abroad, which is quite a lot of the time, he gives our money and our powers away and seems to take leave of his senses. I'm very worried going to Brussels, he's going to give away all sorts of concessions simply to get talks. It's always the EU strategy. Hang tough, make Britain submit, and then say, well, maybe we might find a crumb from the table after you've sent us a full meal.
Yeah.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Let's go back to it. Nikki says, if the cooking oil seeps out of the bitumen, won't the roads become skid risks, says Nikki in Kent. That's a good point. Could you fry food on the road? If it was a hot day, could you do an egg? Maybe just by the double yellows, perhaps. Paul says, hearing that Starmer broke lockdown rules in order to have a secret meeting with his voice coach makes me now have a newfound admiration for Matt Hancock. I mean, a session with your voice coach versus a session with your secret lover. It's a no-brainer. It's a good point, isn't it? Absolutely no-brainer. Back to you, Matthew, in Newport, on the, well, US or EU. What are you making of it, Matthew? Hi.
Well, I just wanted to sort of balance out a little bit. I don't think it's one or the other, as a lot of people have said.
Yeah.
Trading, they're obviously a long way away. That makes the things a little bit more difficult. EU is the closest partnership. But I want to get into the defence side of things. We've got to remember that we are not spending as much, and Trump is right, we should up our game, and for that very reason we should be wary that he won't support NATO or won't support the European lot.
Yep.
And if you look at our biggest defence companies in Britain or the UK, BAE Systems, 23 billion revenue.
Sure.
MBDA, 4.5 billion. Leonardo, 15 billion. And Leonardo, take an example, is owned by the Italians. And they're the second largest defence company in the UK. They've had to work now with the Japanese because of the difficulties of Brexit, and we're making a new aircraft, but that is with Italy. Brexit has been not a disaster, but it's made everything far more difficult in dealing with European defence companies. We have to have internal wars between companies. It's just so ridiculous. And when it comes to actual warfare, I don't know if anyone's aware, but a lot of our radios are made by European countries. We need interoperability. We need our radars to be able to communicate with each other. We need our radios to talk with each other, the missiles to know what systems are firing. And if we're going to be in a war, we're basically going to be defending Europe. We're not going to be defending the States. So we've got to have all that infrastructure, which is with Europe. And even the Americans, I mean, I won't say how, but I mean, the Americans are very interested in our defence companies and European defence companies because they create and make some of the best stuff out there. I mean, Israel doesn't ask for any missiles off other people. They make the best missiles in the world because they're constantly under attack.
That'll be right.
Airbus is owned by a European company. So we are deeply embedded in Europe when it comes to operational ability, defence, and if something is coming to our shores, it's going to have to go over Europe. It is America too far away. We've got, unfortunately, whether you like it or not, the European army, if Trump does get I'm not going to use a word there, and does not want to help, we've got to come together unless we are prepared to spend a lot more money, which is tax, I'd love it, into the defence industry, give jobs. We have to work with our neighbours, and we have done for years. And that last chap who said, Thatcher was looking at this and warfare there, that was 40 years ago. Things have changed.
Well, his argument, Matthew, was that what Thatcher said was quite prophetic in the sense that what she warned against is about to happen. And Starmer's over there in Brussels. He's going to sign us up to an agreement that binds us into a major part of EU commerce and business, which would mean we have to go by their rules, not our own. But, I mean, if you're OK with that, I'm assuming, you think that's a better way forward?
I think if you want to work, this isn't a vacuum we're in. And if you want a defence industry and you don't want to have a massive defence industry and pay for it, we've got to work with our neighbours. And if that means signing up to certain things, then it's going to save us. And I'll tell you what, if weapons and bombs are coming over to Europe, it won't be Americans who will be firing off missiles.
All right, on that point, Matthew, I have to step in because we've literally hit the clock. Thank you for that. Cats versus dogs. Chris in Brighton, my pet dog is not allowed to roam free, kill wildlife and defecate in my neighbour's vegetable patch, so why should it be any different for a cat? Says Chris in Brighton.
They're banning the cats in Scotland. It's my favourite
You need to
story.
plug your microphone in, apparently.
Oh, sugar. Do apologise. That was very unprofessional.
So I can still hear you, though.
I'm doing an impression of Kev O'Sullivan here, aren't I?
Is that... I thought I saw you go for the plug-in there.
How are you, boy?
I'm all right. I'm good as gold. What's
They're
going on?
banning the cats in Scotland.
No cats.
If you've got a pussy, you've got to leave. There you go.
You've got to get out.
But can I just say, Mike Graham is my... I'm sorry, he's become my broadcasting idol, because you can sit here and you can talk all day about, Brexit, Starmer seeks to... I'm not interested. What I'm interested in is that idiot, right, spent all that money on a voice coach and still sounds as pathetic as he's... 5, 4, 3... The whole of Mike's breakfast show was people doing impressions.
It could so easily go wrong when you do the Christmas lights. Do you remember? I mean, it was just... That's the funniest part
But the
about
hypocrisy,
the story.
by the way, of having a go at Boris Johnson apparently breaking lockdown, and you had a woman round to your house in a face mask teaching you how to speak on Christmas Day from a man who said, I care about my family. Well, where were they then?
Standing on a copy of the Yellow Pages with his sternum stuck out going, the rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain.
And how do you... somebody said this morning, how do you teach somebody to speak if you've got a face mask on? It's brilliant.
Yeah,
it's
watch
brilliant.
my lips. I can't!
Yes! So I just want impressions of Keir Starmer. What the hell did he sound like before?
I mean, goodness me.
And why
always
was he
bad.
on Christmas Eve not wrapping presents?
That's a very good point.
Yeah, where were the family?
Yeah.
What was he up to?
Yeah, well, you know, somebody...
The King's Speech.
Somebody just messaged us and said they got newfound sympathy with Matt Hancock, because at least he went to see a lover.
Yeah, absolutely. And Passenger announced...